going to call the meeting to order. We might have a couple more people coming in, but let's get started. And before we start, let me just say that we are in compliance with local and state shelter-in-place orders as allowed by Governor Newsom's executive order N-2920 until further notice. TAM Board of Commissioners meetings will not be providing an in-person meeting location for the public to attend. The commission will meet via Zoom, and members of the public are encouraged to participate remotely as described below. Note this meeting will not be webcast on the TAM Granicus page. So the first item that we have on the agenda, here it is. Okay. I do not have a chair's report tonight other than what I just said. So,
Chair, may I do a roll call?
Yes, please. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Commissioner Arnold.
Here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Present.
Commissioner Carmel.
Present.
Commissioner Cleveland Knowles. Commissioner Colbert.
Present.
Commissioner Connolly.
Here.
Commissioner Fredericks.
Here.
Commissioner Hilmer. Commissioner Kuhl.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Lucan.
Here.
Commissioner Phillips.
Here.
Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Rice. Commissioner Rodoni.
Present.
Commissioner Sears.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum?
Thank you. All right, so now let's go to commissioner matters that are not on the agenda. Anyone have anything to say or talk about that are not on our agenda today? No, I don't see any hands. Okay, then let's go to the executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Chair Arnold. I do have a brief report this evening to share. I'll try to keep it somewhat short since there are a lot of presentations on the agenda for tonight. Let's get this queued up. Let's see, there we go. All right, so there's still plenty happening at TAM, even though we are continuing to work mostly remotely. We've now acquired supplies such as masks and sanitizer for the eventual return to the office and when people are here occasionally. As reported previously, I have been participating in the Marin Recovers Transportation Task Force, and the transit guidelines have now been posted on the Marin Recovers website, and they are generally in line with the state's guidance for transit. Since our last board meeting, TAM has hosted 2 meetings of the stakeholder working group for the 101-580 Direct Connector project. This group provides a forum for the project team to understand community concerns and issues early in the project development, and it creates an ongoing communication channel. The committee is comprised of volunteers representing a variety of interests in the county, such as neighborhood, environmental, business, and education interests, and we are planning for another meeting in August, and we certainly appreciate all their time and effort on this group. We've talked quite a bit about the Connect to Transit program, so I wanted to let you all know that last week I participated in a webinar through a group called CoMotion Live that was focused on Uber and ride sharing in California. And I was able to highlight the innovative partnership that we have between TAM, Marin Transit, and Uber, as well as some of our other programs. Panelists included folks from UCLA, Uber, and LA Metro, and it was a pretty well attended event and was kind of fun as well. I would like to also note that as of this month, we're moving the Caltrans report to be an attachment to my executive director's report rather than a standalone agenda item. As a reminder, this report is produced monthly and provides the status of the many Caltrans projects around the county. As always, staff is happy to answer any questions about the report or to seek further information. Despite everything, it is still a busy time for public outreach, and a few outreach or comment efforts are shown on this slide. So MTC recently released the draft blueprint for Plan Bay Area, essentially laying out what is to be included in the plan, and you'll be hearing more about this later on your agenda. The county also released their draft strategic plan for Drawdown Marin, and Caltrans released a notice of preparation for the State Route 37 Interim Project B environmental work. They held a public scoping meeting on Zoom last night, actually, on this topic with about 130 attendees. And the comment due dates for each of these projects are shown on the slide. Turning to some partner news, I thought you'd be interested to know that the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, our counterparts in our neighboring county here, approved placing a sales tax extension on the November ballot that would extend their quarter-cent transportation sales tax for another 20 years. MTC has been busy as well. You may know that they formed a Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force to help guide the region's response to transit during these COVID times. The group is to develop a transit transformational action plan, as well as help MTC decide on the distribution of funding from the CARES Act. So yesterday, this mission did approve the second round of CARES Act funding, with a total between the two rounds of about $75 million to the three operators in Marin, which obviously will help tremendously, but they probably still have a long way to go in terms of transit recovery. At the state, I just wanted to mention that the California Transportation Foundation recently named Alameda County Supervisor and current MTC Chair Scott Haggerty as their Person of the Year as part of their annual awards program, which was done online this year. And finally, I wanted to let you know that as of now, we are planning to cancel the TAM August executive and board meetings, and we would let you know if that changes for any reason, but otherwise our next meetings will be held in September. And that concludes my report.
Great. Are there any questions or comments on the executive director's report? Okay. Is that your hand, Ann? No. Okay. All right. Thank you, Ann, very much. Let's go on to the next item on the agenda, of which are commissioners' reports. And first we have the MTC report, and I'm going to turn to Damon Connolly.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. We had a busy MTC meeting yesterday. Ann alluded to kind of the key things that we took up. I'm reminded I need to coordinate with Ann so she stops stealing my thunder on these reports, but all good. Just to reiterate, CARES Act funding, we did relatively well in terms of securing monies through the two tranches that were allocated through MTC via the Blue Ribbon Task Force. A couple of notes on that. It was noteworthy that a number of speakers showed up from representing transit workers and really pushing for safety in our transit systems, a goal we all agree with. They had asked for a specific percentage of the CARES Act allocations to go toward that purpose. We decided not to go that direction, but reinforced that interested persons should reach out to specific local transit boards and continue to push the safety issues, and that MTC will expect kind of a monthly update on where things stand with that. Plan Bay Area 2050, I was reminded that that is later on our agenda, but that is in high gear right now, including the fact that yesterday at MTC, we voted on recommendations on specific regional discretionary funding levels for the transportation element of Plan Bay Area final blueprint. There are a couple of notable things that are included that I'm sure we'll go over later, as well as a couple that did not make the initial cut, but that we'll continue to monitor as well. Digital workshops and online comment forums are soliciting input on PBA 2050 through August 10th, and broader strategy refinements will be looked at in September 2020 following that public engagement process. Finally, there are a number of housing bills emerging in Sacramento that are of interest, 3 of which came before MTC yesterday. I will note there's a lot of uncertainty right now. The legislature is scheduled to come back into session July 27th. It's unclear exactly what they will take up at that time, given the time frame we now live in. But theoretically, there is a fairly large package of housing bills being pushed by the Senate President Pro Tem and others at this time. SB 902, the latest incarnation of Scott Wiener's bill, has been revised. MTC was recommending a support position. I voted no on that with a couple other commissioners. While it increases local control, which was one of our concerns, and that a local jurisdiction has to opt in to the up zone, it calls for CEQA streamlining and also up to 10 units per parcel. So on balance, was not ready to support that one. SB 995 is another CEQA streamlining bill. This was originally a way in 2011 to fast track large stadium projects like the Sacramento Kings Arena. They are now proposing to extend it by 4 years and add larger housing developments with a 15% affordability component. So kind of minimal on affordability. And again, the concern is CEQA fast tracking in that one. And finally, AB 3040 would allow a local jurisdiction, again, if it chose, to rezone. There's an incentive to rezone parcels for duplexes and fourplexes, and that a jurisdiction would then be allowed to count those units toward its RENA requirement. So that's one League of California Cities is supporting in concept. Assemblymember Levine voted for it, and I, on balance, voted yes on that. That went through unanimously with one abstention. So with that, there are a number of other housing bills. Feel free to circle back with me if you'd like to discuss any of those further. Thanks.
Okay. The next report is from Commissioner Rodoni on the Marin Transit report.
Good evening. Marin Transit met July 13th, and this is our report to TAM tonight, July 23rd. The fare change, Marin Transit put a new fare policy in place starting July 1. Several improvements have been made to the fare program, including the monthly adult pass has been decreased from $80 a month to $40 a month. For people over 65, the monthly pass has been reduced to $20 per month. And a new low-income fare assistance program has been put in place where people over 65 and people with disabilities that are on Medicare or who are low income will get discounts on paratransit, demand response services, and fixed route service. So far, 434 people have applied for the low-income fare assistance, and 247 has actually been certified and are now eligible for the program. The new fare program is designed to encourage riders to use passes or Clipper instead of cash. Then the Clipper Start program, MTC is considering adding Marin Transit to the regional means-based fare subsidy program called Clipper Start. If approved, Marin Transit will be able to further reduce its bus fares to low-income riders. The program will complement the new fare program that Marin Transit has implemented, and will help increase Clipper usage on the system. So we're trying to drive down our fares for our riders and also make it easier and hopefully start eliminating the cash that we have to collect. Marin Transit has an annual presentation tonight on item A, and Nancy will be joining us for that. And our next meeting is August 3rd.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right, does any board members have questions or comments on the 3 reports we just heard? Okay. Actually, we haven't heard the 3rd one, and that's SMART. So Eric Lucan, please.
Thank you, Chair Arnold. I'll make it brief, just 2 quick updates from SMART, one on the budget front and the other one on some listening sessions. At the end of June, we did pass a very challenging budget with some significant cuts. We were fortunate to have about 8 total public meetings since mid-April with some strong public engagement really to assist us in that process. And while we adopted significant cuts in the budget, including service schedule, some vacant positions, and some certain amenities like onboard Wi-Fi, we also agreed that we're going to revisit the budget in the fall once we have a better picture of sales tax impacts and additional assistance coming our way. So much like all local jurisdictions in the area, you make certain cuts going into the budget, but also somewhat of a wait and see and a revisit window in the fall. Secondly, to report from SMART, now that we are through the budget, we're really focused on continuing our path forward following the Measure I defeat earlier this year. We continue to engage with riders, stakeholders, residents, and gather a lot of feedback. Fortunately, a lot of groups are reaching out to us, sharing feedback with individual board members. But as a board, we felt it was really important to get out into the community and really listen and really try to understand where we stand with the community and how we can do better when we go out next time. Our hope, our intention was to do those meetings in person, but certainly as the shelter in place has continued, we felt it's important to get out into the community now, even if that means we have to do it virtually. So we're going to be kicking off a handful of virtual listening sessions, starting in Sonoma County and then expanding to Marin County, just as a first step of getting out and hearing from the residents so that we can get better and improve. So I'll try to keep this board updated as to when some of those listening sessions might happen in Marin, because we want to get the word out and we want to get as many people engaged and participating as possible. So that's it from SMART.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Lucan. Any questions on SMART or comments? Okay. Now we are going to go to open time for public expression, and this is for items that are not on the agenda. I'm going to ask the clerk if she has seen any members of the public that would like to speak.
I see nobody asking for time for public comment, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to the consent calendar. And does anyone have questions or comments about consent? Okay, so there's A to E, and if there are no questions and no one from the public, is there anyone from the public that wants to speak to consent?
Not on the consent calendar, thank you.
Thank you, all right. So then do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
James Campbell, I'll make the motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Second, Phillips.
Okay, you got that, Denise?
Yes, ma'am. May I call the roll?
Yep.
All right, Commissioner Campbell. Oh. Commissioner
Yes.
Campbell.
Yes.
Commissioner Cornell.
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert.
Yes.
Commissioner Connolly.
Yes.
Commissioner Fredericks,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Cool,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan,
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Rice,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Sears,
Yes.
Chair Arnold.
Yes.
That item passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. All right, then let's go to number 8A. And this is,
Chair, we need to cover item 7, if you would, please.
oh yes, I see it here, thank you. This is to adopt a position on State Ledge Bill 288. So this is an action item. And who's going to kick that off?
So we have Dave Chan, TAM's Programming and Legislative Manager, and also with us tonight is Gus Curry, our
Yes.
man in Sacramento, if you will. And I would also just like to note that we did receive a number of written comments on this item that we distributed to the commissioners earlier this afternoon, and I don't believe we've received any additional written comments since that time.
Great.
So, David, do you want to do an introduction of the item, please?
Yeah, certainly. Before Gus proceed, I wanted to inform the board that yes, part of our presentation will be on SB 288, in addition to giving the board an overview of what's going on in Sacramento. But while you're listening to Gus on SB 288, keep in mind, as Ann mentioned, we did email support and opposition letter to SB 288. For those of you who didn't get a chance to read the email, we received a letter opposing SB 288 from the Marin Audubon Society, Judy Schwinkman, resident of San Rafael, Marin Bayland Advocates, Marin Conservation League, and also Friends of Corte Madera Creek, or Friends of Corte Madera. And we also received one letter in support of SB 288, and that's from Marin County Bicycle Coalition. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gus.
Thank you. Hi, Gus. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair and board members. Gus Corey, Legislative Advocate, Corey Consulting. Pleasure to see you all. I think, Madam Chair, just before I back into SB 288, just a very quick preview of what's going on in Sacramento with respect to the legislative calendar and the state budget. So as you know, as Commissioner Connolly mentioned, the legislature has been on an extended summer recess. They are scheduled to come back this coming Monday. The end of session is August 31st. They came during the summer recess. This year, as you know, has been unprecedented. They took an extended spring recess. They worked the month of May into about the latter part of June. They officially adjourned on July 9th, I believe. And so now they're coming back, given that they have to deal with the state budget. Per the Constitution, they had to pass a package to the governor by June 15th. The governor signed the package, but for all intents and purposes, it was a placeholder in order to address a $54 billion deficit that we're facing due to the COVID crisis. There's even a structural deficit going out into fiscal year 23-24 of $16 billion. So they did take some actions to eliminate $6 billion of proposed spending for the fiscal year for 2021. There's some tax credits that they're doing away with for research and development, net operating loss of about $4.5 billion. But we're banking on the come and hoping that the stimulus package has some relief. The legislature and governor were looking for about $14 billion in federal assistance in order to stave off cuts to programs such as education and health and human services. If there's a silver lining, it's that 2019 was a really strong year, and that the estimates were trending at about $6.5 billion more than what was originally projected. And so we're hoping that there's a glimmer of good news now that tax day We're 8 days past that, and it'll result in less cuts. For transportation, thankfully, even though your local sales tax measure has taken a dip, the state sales tax has taken a dip. Caltrans does have a reserve of funding, even though they are estimating, and this goes back to May, $1.8 billion less in revenues, and that number is going to go up, of course, with the extension of the shelter-in-place order. But the good news is that there is sufficient cash flow, that the competitive programs that we're vying for, that staff has been working really hard with, MTC and Caltrans on submitting for projects such as the Marin Sonoma Narrows. Those programs are predominantly funded by the vehicle registration fee, which we advocated for the inclusion in SB1. So that's steady, predictable funding. So this fiscal year, we might be able to triage. Next year is going to be much more daunting for sure. So we'll know more once the numbers actually get released by the Department of Finance. One other bit of good news, I know that public transportation has really just been pummeled due to the lack of revenue, the lack of ridership and fare box recovery. I did work in conjunction with the California Transit Association on a budget trailer bill. It's Assembly Bill 90. And what that does is it provides relief for all of the state funding programs for public transportation. That includes the Local Transportation Fund, the State Transportation Assistance Program, the State of Good Repair Program, and the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. So it's given folks a pass on not meeting their fare box in order to access funding, so that we can maintain what existing service we can deliver at this point in time to kind of get us past this, this wave. And so that's good for a couple of fiscal years. And so pretty pleased to at least be able to have done that. Just very quickly, I did mention we've been heavily involved with the SB1 Cycle 2 submittals. The deadline was last week for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. On your behalf, in coordinating with TAM staff and others, I'm pleased that the Commission, in the adoption of their guidelines, took some language to make us even more competitive by saying that they'll prioritize completion of a corridor. We know that Sonoma got funded, the Sonoma segment got funded in Cycle 1, so we're hoping to polish off our portion. We also included language to fund projects in counties with a population of less than 500,000 to acknowledge that while we're doing our part of being a self-help county, that we need that partnership in order to rely on the state to kind of make good on its commitment to take care of arterials. And so fingers crossed, the staff recommendations come out towards the end of October, and the Commission will announce awards in December of this year. And so I'm happy to continue advocacy and working with Director Richmond and other stakeholders on trying to secure that award. So with respect to the bills, as you know, Commissioner Connolly had just referred to this. It's incredibly fluid. There's only one bill this month that we're asking you to take action on, and that's Senate Bill 288 that's authored by Senator Wiener. This bill, it was a gut amend. It's set for hearing in the Natural Resources Committee this coming Wednesday. And what it does is it provides for CEQA streamlining to deliver on non-capacity inducing projects for bus rapid transit, for road maintenance and repair, for electrification, for charging stations for electrification of our highway system, using bus on shoulder. And there are different thresholds. So for say like a bike and ped project, if you will, that's, or a repair over a bridge for a minor or major arterial, there would be streamlining. If it's something more substantial, say if it's passenger rail that's being contemplated, that would undergo more scrutiny. If the project threshold, if it's over $100 million, then the project would have to be included into a regional transportation plan for, I believe it's a 10-year period. And it would have to go through the full CEQA process. The Governor's Office of Planning and Research also would have oversight over such a submission, and unless they decide to delegate that to the MPO, which in our case would be MTC, of course. So I think both Director Richmond and Mr. Chan mentioned the various letters that TAM has received, and so we're recommending a support position on this one, and would appreciate your feedback and your action this evening. So, Madam Chair, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the budget-related items or any of the other legislation that's on the matrix before you.
Great, thank you, Gus. Any questions for Gus?
Gus, on this one, I'll just note that this bill also came before us at MTC yesterday, and it was a 16-0 vote in support.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Fredericks.
I have to say that after the reports we got at the executive committees, and when I sat down and read the text, it really wasn't clear to me what the bill exempts from CEQA and what the bill exempts from its exemptions from CEQA. I think it's basically a good idea to make some of these smaller projects that are not capacity inducing a little easier to process, but I don't feel that I have a good enough understanding of this bill to vote yes.
Okay.
Alex, let me add one point, because there was a point of clarification along those lines yesterday for what it's worth, and this is kind of the other extreme. The question was, would high-speed rail therefore be exempt from CEQA?
No, it's not.
The answer is no. It goes to that point Gus is making about the sliding scale.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just concerned about what kind of impacts any particular project, because aside from some obvious things like bus on shoulder, I'm not clear on how it will affect some of the sensitive areas that the environmentalists were concerned about.
Okay. Commissioner Campbell, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Whose hand did I see?
Katie.
Katie, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just Gus, to follow up on Alice's question. So if you think about the universe of projects that we know potentially are potentially coming down the pike, whether it's improvements on 37 or I'm trying to think of some other stuff, or the Bettini Transit Station, or I don't know if the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. I'm just think about the kinds of projects that are coming down the pike. I have the same concern around trying to make the process a little easier for the very small projects that are just replacement projects like the bridge or some of our road projects, which actually, frankly, they might already be able to be exempted. But what about those other projects that are on the horizon? And then, if you could also, I mean, CEQA already allows for a lot of exemptions on current existing transit infrastructure. So how would the world behave differently in our world here if SB 288 is adopted?
So, Commissioner, I'll defer to Director Richmond on any kind of specifics relative to some of the projects that you have going locally. But I think this is an important point to emphasize is, we're closely tracking what the Newsom administration and in particular the Air Resources Board, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the California State Transportation Agency are looking to add more teeth to the governor's executive order from last September. And so they've got a transportation action plan that's out. And it is very clear about not having capacity inducing projects and trying to encourage mode shift, which means getting out of your car, relying on bike and ped, relying on public transit where it's feasible. And so I can't see the bill getting signed if there was even a hint that this was going to result in greater impacts on environmentally sensitive areas, such as the Highway 37 corridor. But Director Richmond, you might have a little bit more to add on that, so I'll defer to you.
Sure. So this is Ann Richmond. I can respond a bit to the question about particular projects. I mean, some of those projects are of such a substantial size that they would almost certainly undergo CEQA and probably NEPA as well. For example, the work on Highway 37. I mean, the ultimate project is of such a scale that it would be unlikely to qualify for any of these kinds of exemptions. The Bettini Transit Center in Golden Gate has already begun an environmental process for that, and I believe they would probably carry through with that since they've already started it. Marin Sonoma Narrows has prior environmental clearance. I think the things that would be more likely to be subject to this, or would fall under these new exemptions rather, would be something like a bus on shoulder project, depending on the size or scale of that. Some fairly straightforward bicycle and pedestrian type projects. I think, you know, there could be some questions with some of those projects where they are near sensitive habitats, and whether the implementing agency would want to take advantage of these exemptions or would continue with the CEQA process on their own, which I believe they would be able to do under this bill. Gus is nodding, so I think I have that right. If they felt like that was warranted, or they wanted to work with the community in that way. So hope that answers your questions about some of the particular.
Yeah, no, that does. I appreciate that. And actually that was my next question was going to be, this doesn't preclude the local agency or the project sponsor from, or the agency from doing CEQA. And I'm thinking of Sir Francis Drake in this realm. So the Sir Francis Drake project actually didn't require CEQA or a full EIR, and we elected to go forward with that just towards addressing any potential issues. So I think you've answered my question. I take the letters that came to us to heart. These a lot of these organizations, thinking about the Marine Conservation League specifically, frankly, they've been very, very supportive of public transportation and reducing congestion and reducing our GHGs. And I am concerned, given the amount of wetlands that a lot of our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure is adjacent to or will be in the near future. But I'll be interested to hear the further conversation on this.
Chair Arnold, I believe there are a couple of other commissioners with hands up, at least on Zoom. I'm not sure if everyone can see that, but.
Supervisor Rodoni, did you have a question?
Supervisor Rodoni, can you unmute, please?
Sorry. Yeah, just a couple comments. First, I had a question for David. I didn't actually see the email with the letters attached and wondered if she could just give us sort of a general, I think I know what the objections were, what the general objection was by the opponents. And then just lastly, I think I kind of have a bigger concern here, and that's as we move forward inch by inch, exempting CEQA on transportation, on housing, on stuff, and I just don't know what that does overall to the California Environmental Quality Act, and I have a concern that cumulatively we're basically stripping it, or we're going to eliminate it. And I think if we all recognize that going in, that's okay, but at the end of the day, I'm a little concerned about picking it apart in pieces and ended up with a very weak act and not protecting the resources the way we should. So I'll probably vote no or abstain on this, just because I'd like to wait and see how it all plays out.
Commissioner Rodoni, which letter did you specifically want to hear about?
This was the comments that were in opposition to 288. You had
Um,
several, you said, from, sound like environmental groups.
Yeah, there
Just
were
wondered if
5
you
of
could,
them.
yeah, okay. You could just tell me in general what they were opposed to. Was it just CEQA and that was it?
They vary. There was just a general concern that this would degrade the Secret Act, but the concern, they range, pretty wide. And the concern was that some of the letter characterized as a degradation of Secret Act that they cannot support. And there were also general concern with natural resources that this bill would not protect. So again, there were 5 letters. They all have different concern, but that's kind of the gist of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Who else? Yes, Commissioner Carmel.
Yeah, thanks. So, so I'm coming to the council from the Planning Commission. So every project that we look at has got a CEQA component to it. And, for home and building construction, CEQA does its job. It ensures that, for example, you don't build next to a wetland or near a creek or sufficiently far away from it to protect those habitats. I think what's really significant about what I've read about this bill, at least, and the supporters behind it, is that 1, these are small projects. Number 2, these are greenhouse, gas reducing projects, right? These are bicycle and pedestrian projects. They are bus projects. They are rail projects. And as everybody knows, or should know at least, 50 to 60% of greenhouse gas emissions in Marin County come from transportation. So, on a net basis, these are, positive for the environment. And I think that's really the significant factor when you're considering this thing. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else on 2A? Yes, Commissioner Lucan.
Just to add on to Commissioner Carmel's comments, which I think are spot on, that these are for mode shifts. I look at it specifically from bike paths, and just looking at the cost to add 1 mile of bike path here and there, and what those types of projects are costing these days, and also the time it's taking to complete them. Now we're fortunate to have a lot of bike paths already have clearance, but for the future, I see this as something that really goes in line with some of our key missions at TAM, which is to encourage mode shift and to see some of these projects be able to get done. These small scale projects that take people off the road. So I'm going to be voting in support.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Yes, I might also like to point out that the salt marsh areas, which are of concern in relation to some of these connector points, are also very much threatened by sea level rise, and the nature of the projects are basically, as other commissioners have noted, working to reduce that impact. So one could say that we're all going in the same direction, and the devil's in the details. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hilmer. No? Oh, okay. Anyone else? Okay. Clerk, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this?
Yes, ma'am, we do. We have one, Kate Powers, and I am going to unmute her now. Kate?
Yes, thank you for taking my comments. I'm calling, I'm representing Marin Conservation League, and I just appreciate you considering our concerns. We, as an organization, are also interested in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and are paying a lot of attention to climate change issues and possible solutions. In this case, we feel that some of the small projects already have an opportunity for exemption with the common sense exception. We feel that it's not, this bill has been rushed through, and some of the details are not secure in terms of what minor arterial, major arterial bridges, local major and minor collector streets, and what kinds of impacts those may or may not have. And by not being able to know how these impacts might have on particular projects in Marin that we are tracking, we are asking that you not take a position. We're not asking you to take a position of no on 288. We're asking you to not take a position of support as the bill is currently written. If this bill came out at the beginning of a 2-year session and it had stakeholder input throughout the process and we could get to the details on what that actually meant, it would be a different story. But this is a common practice right now with Senator Wiener, where at the end of a session another bill is gutted, language is put in, and there's a deadline where there's not enough public input. And so we're asking that you, in our letter, we named some of the projects that we have particular concerns about, but we also feel that many of our transportation routes throughout the county are happen to have impacts on Marin City, the Canal area, and some communities in West Marin as well. Although this is more of an urban bill. Those transportation projects and those components of transportation projects could impact those communities more than other communities. So I just ask you to take a position of non-support at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else from the public to comment?
Yes, Chair, we have another Bjorn Griepenberg with MCBC, and I'm going to unmute you, Bjorn.
Okay, welcome, Bjorn.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bjorn Griepenberg, Policy and Planning Director at Marin County Bicycle Coalition. I hope you're all doing well. As noted by David, we provided a letter of support for this bill for the reasons many of you raised with regard to our climate crisis and the need for mode shift. And we really do understand the reasons or the concerns raised by the conservation organizations. So we actually reached out to one of the bill sponsors this afternoon for clarification on these points. So I just wanted to share what we learned. First, they told us that this bill only exempts projects that are already on existing public right-of-way, so it would not create new structures through wetlands or sensitive habitats. And oftentimes the only alternative to a bike path is driving, as was the case with a challenge on a multi-use pathway down in Santa Cruz, where the only alternative to that pathway was driving on Highway 1. Some bicycle projects, this is kind of with regard to the questions around what's already exempt, and a lot of bicycle projects do already receive a categorical exemption, but this bill would actually move those from a categorical to a statutory exemption to provide additional time certainty and reduce the need for significant analysis. And lastly, it also extends the statutory exemption for bicycle plans to 2030, and that's set to expire in January of 2021. So that's something that we are obviously in support of. So again, I just wanted to add that to this conversation, and thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, we have our next speaker is Cindy Winter. I'm going to unmute Cindy. Okay. Cindy, go ahead.
Hey. Hello, Cindy.
I just happened to be listening in, and I heard what Bjorn said. I'm an MCBC member. I support what he said. I think he spoke very well, and I hope you'll pay attention to his comments. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
And Chair, I think that does it. Okay. I think that does it for our written. Oh wait, no, we have one more, please. Jane Severinghouse, and I am Jane. Can you speak?
Yes. Good evening. I read as much as I could this afternoon about the bill, and there's a couple of things that really strike me, having lived through 19 years of projects and incredible delays on what should be a really straightforward bicycle or pedestrian project. Very daunting, frankly. One of the things that I thought is really positive in the bill that nobody's talked about is that this bill would require upfront public input to make a better project instead of waiting down the line for the CEQA input, because I found that to be true, that by the time you get to the CEQA input, it's like a couple of years down and it's really too late to get the project going in the direction the community really needs and wants. So just one more thing to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, but anyone else?
Oh, wait. I think that is it, Chair.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to bring this back to the board. Any comments or questions now before we take a vote? This is an action item. And is anyone ready to make a motion on this?
I wanted to make a comment, if I may.
Sure, please.
You know, since there is some concern about how cooked the language of this bill is, it is possible to make a motion to simply watch it. And I just want to put that out as an alternative.
Thank you. Did you want to make that motion?
Sure. I make a motion that we take a position of watch for SB 288.
Do we have a second to that?
Dennis Rodoni will second it.
Okay. So we'll do our roll call. Denise?
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Yes. Commissioner Campbell?
No.
Commissioner Carmel?
No.
Commissioner Colbert?
No.
Commissioner Connolly?
No.
Commissioner Fredericks?
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer?
No.
Commissioner Cool?
No.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan?
No.
Commissioner Phillips?
No.
Commissioner Reed?
No.
Commissioner Rice?
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni?
Yes.
Commissioner Sears?
No.
All right, the motion fails. We have 4 ayes, we have 11 nays, and we have 1 absent.
And does the chair not vote on this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Chair Arnold, you get a vote.
I vote no.
Okay. Okay, the motion fails.
Okay.
Four ayes, 11 nays, and 1 absent.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone that would like to make another motion?
Yes, Eric Lucan, I'll make a motion that we adopt a support position.
Is there?
Campbell, second.
Who seconded it?
James Campbell.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second to approve it. Are you ready, Denise?
I am ready to do the roll call. Here we go. Commissioner Campbell.
Yes.
Commissioner Carmel.
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert.
Yes.
Commissioner Connolly.
Yes.
Commissioner Fredericks.
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer.
Yes.
Commissioner Cool.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee.
I'd like to abstain if I can, and not.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Lucan.
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips.
Yes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes.
Commissioner Rice.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni.
No.
Commissioner Sears.
Yes.
And Chair Arnold.
Yes. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so that motion passes. We have 13 ayes, 1 no, 1 abstain, and 1 absent.
Okay. All right. Let us go on now to number 8 on the agenda, and that's Marin Transit's annual presentation to us. And I'm looking to see and I see her. Nancy Whalen is here, and I'm going to turn this over to you, Nancy.
Okay, Ann, did you want me to just jump right in here?
Do you have
Well, let me just say briefly, so there are 3 subparts to item 8. There's Nancy's annual report presentation, and then there are 2 allocation action items that we're requesting of the board tonight. So Thanks very much, Nancy, for participating. We're glad to see you.
Yes.
Thank you. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that they're bringing up right now, and I'm going to ask them to advance the slides by just saying next slide. And so, good evening, Chair Arnold and Commissioners. I'm Nancy Whelan, General Manager at Marin Transit. And tonight I will be going over our annual report. It's a little different this year for those of you who've been around before. In the past, we've outlined our achievements from the previous year and then outlined what we're going to be doing in the subsequent year, this year, and make our allocation request. And this time we're going to do a little differently because we've had a major pandemic. And so the first part of my presentation will focus on what we've been doing over the past 4 months. So next slide, please. Just very briefly, kind of how the FY 19-20 year went for us. We ended the year with about 2.7 million passenger trips, which is down about 15% due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We provided a rapid response to that. We continued essential services, but we did shift our focus from productivity, which we typically measure in passengers per hour as an example, to the new safety requirements that we were needing to put in place due to the pandemic. We were providing transportation in essential corridors. We focused on financial stability, and we did continue with our long-term capital and planning projects. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did have a rapid response in late March when we first were under the shelter-in-place order. We had to cancel services to our schools and the Muirwoods shuttle in cooperation with the National Park Service when Muirwoods closed. We also began to see very significant ridership decreases. We saw an 80% decrease on our fixed route service and an 84% decrease on Marin Access, which is our paratransit and other accessible services. We saw our contractors, all of our services are contracted. We have 4 different contractors, and 2 of our contractors in particular were facing furloughs of their employees. Whistle Stop, who provides our paratransit service, because the paratransit demand had been so diminished, was faced with potentially laying off drivers, as was MV Transportation. They are the provider of our supplemental school routes and Muirwoods shuttle. At this time, we were also facing new safety requirements from the federal government, from state, and from our county. And we very quickly had to put operational policy changes into place and had to notify our riders of everything that was going on. So we were busy, very busy, responding to new orders, to new information, and best practices that we were learning about nearly daily or weekly. So next slide, please. During this time, we've continued to provide transit services to those who need it the most. That would be low-income riders, essential workers who are going to work, or people making essential trips. We continue to provide service to hospitals, healthcare centers, grocery stores, pharmacies, and the like during the shelter-in-place. We have maintained our core and lifeline services and will continue to do so as we recover. And we have provided our on-demand services, particularly our Connect service, which we've done in collaboration with TAM and Uber, that can provide a safety net in certain cases where other transit services are not available. Next slide, please. And as ridership was dropping, the impacts of the pandemic on the economy, of course, are being felt. And more than 60% of Marin Transit's operating revenue depends on sales tax-based revenues. And our FY 2021 budget projection, which was done back in April, showed a revenue loss of $4.8 million. And this slide just tries to help understand the magnitude of that drop. For us, that would mean something like the annual operating budget of our entire West Marin stagecoach service, plus the Muirwoods shuttle, plus our supplemental school services. Or on the capital side, it would have meant the purchase of 49 paratransit vehicles or 5 electric buses. Next slide. We still have great revenue uncertainty. And to plan for that, we've been fortunate to have received CARES Act funding. We are planning for possible service cuts, however, And we will be taking budget updates and revisions to the Marin Transit Board as the economic picture clarifies. As somebody said, it's kind of a perpetual event for us to be monitoring and reporting back. Next slide. So a little bit about the CARES Act, and you heard about it earlier tonight. It's a $1.3 billion package of funding available to transit agencies in the Bay Area that MTC has allocated. It was distributed based on 5 principles around the notion of getting the money out there early, based on need as estimated by revenue losses, and by equity as measured by the percent of riders with incomes of less than $50,000 a year. MTC distributed the first phase of funding on April 22nd, and the second phase, as was mentioned, was just distributed or approved yesterday. For phase 1 and phase 2, Marin Transit received a total of $10.2 million. And that little spaghetti chart to the right is a list of all of the transit agencies who received funding under the CARES Act. And although we are very grateful for the additional funding, it really is a stopgap measure that allows us to some time actually to plan for an economic recovery and ridership recovery or changes that we will need to make to our service. And the federal government, in passing this act, only expected this to last through 2020. We are fortunate at Marin Transit that we'll be able to spread that out a little bit longer, and we don't expect any major service cuts this fiscal year, but we are going to begin planning for them for the future years. Next slide, please. The impact of the CARES Act on Marin Transit's operating revenue is significant. The title on this slide is wrong. It's actually the 2020-2021 operations budget revenue. And annually, we have about $35.1 million. What's different this year is the share of federal funding. With CARES Act, we have budgeted for 17% of our revenue from federal sources, which is primarily the CARES Act money. Just as an example, last year we had 5% in federal money. And the other differences, of course, are in the areas where we've had to see a decrease or planning for a decrease. That would be in the STA and TDA. So that's the kind of gold bars to the left there and the blue bar. Those are now about 16%, 15% of our budget, and last year they were 22%, so we've seen a drop there. And then Measure A and Measure AA was 39% last year and is now 35%. And in fact, that's we're very grateful to have that, and that's been able to be achieved because we've been able to carry forward prior year Measure A and also the release of the reserves. So this is the operating budget that was adopted by Marin Transit in June. Next slide, please. So that was, of course, a snapshot in time, and we understood in June, as we do now, that we need to continue to take steps to understand and improve the district's services and financial health. This is just kind of a listing of the things that we are paying close attention to and what we're trying to do. We are monitoring revenues and ridership, of course. We're reducing costs where we can. Our budget shows about $120,000 reduction in administrative costs over what we had planned initially. We are looking for cost efficiencies in other ways. We've made service adjustments that will take effect in September, and they will have minimal impacts to our passengers, but will save the district about $1.2 million. And we are developing operation scenarios to ensure that we continue to provide core lifeline services with the physical distancing requirements that we have. And right now, our biggest unknown on this list is how and when schools will reopen. Next slide, please. So turning to our ridership over the past 4 months, although ridership did take a drop by 80% initially, ridership has been slowly increasing since June, and we are now at about 60% of our normal ridership. So this chart shows ridership by week, so the weeks are across the bottom there, since the middle of March and ending at the end of June. The gray shaded area shows the average weekday ridership for 2019. So the average weekday ridership for a year before this. And the green bars show weekday ridership since the pandemic began, and the blue bars show the weekend ridership. And to kind of help you read what is on the other axis, that means that at this time last year, our weekly ridership was about 65,000 passengers, and now it's at about 25,000 passengers. So we are seeing a slight uptick, a growth back in our ridership. Next slide, please. The pandemic has prompted some innovative uses of our paratransit vehicles and drivers. Due to the extreme low demand for paratransit service and to our desire to retain our workforce, paratransit vehicles and drivers have been used for meal and grocery delivery and have been available if called upon by the County Office of Emergency Services. Additionally, we've implemented new safety protocols on paratransit because these riders tend to be the most at risk of contracting coronavirus. Under normal circumstances, we try to group rides for efficiency, but we are limiting the number of passengers on a vehicle to 1 or 2 due to this high-risk group. Next slide, please. So I mentioned physical distancing, and physical distancing on public transit is becoming a significant challenge, especially as riders are returning to our service. To achieve physical distancing, we are limiting our big buses to 9 passengers. And with only 9 passengers in a bus that seats 37, capacity is reduced by 75%. So what that means is that when a bus has 9 passengers on it and it arrives at a stop where passengers are waiting to board, they can't get on. So this results in what we call a pass up. And so the driver waves to them that they need to get the next bus behind. Next slide, please. Pass-ups reached an average of 40 per day in May. And in response to that, we added backup bus service, which is essentially a bus that trails the primary scheduled bus so that it can board additional passengers, those who would have been waiting. We'd started that on May 30th with an additional bus service through the canal on a loop, and then also serving the 101 bus pads and the Somerville Transit Center. And even with the added bus service, the number of passengers passed up at bus stop increased by 13% from May to June. In the month of June, more than 1,500 people were passed up due to bus capacity. Now that doesn't mean they were completely stranded. It meant that they just got passed up and the next bus had to pick them up. What we've learned is that with the addition of the supplemental bus service at the beginning of June, the pass-up locations shifted from the majority of them occurring around the canal in May. That's what we were seeing. And in June, what we saw is that they were occurring more at Somerville Transit Center and on the bus pads and other locations. So basically, we've learned that the supplemental service in the canal is helping move passengers from the canal to the transit center, but passengers are experiencing pass-ups at the transit center while attempting to make connections to get to their final destinations. And secondly, the growth in ridership is just meaning that we are now experiencing pass-ups throughout the system more consistently. We're continuing to monitor these trends, and we are going to continue to adjust and add service as we can to address this pass-up activity. Again, all due to the restriction of keeping only 9 passengers to a bus for safe social distancing.
Wow.
So I'm going to shift gears here, and on the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about the allocation requests that you are considering today. The first category of our allocation request is for the local bus service, and we're requesting $9 million be allocated to that. This service is primarily focused on our local and basic trunk line routes and our community shuttles, and in the past has been on the Muirwoods shuttle. We did indeed cancel that service back in March, and very recently, in conjunction with the National Park Service, we've agreed that we will not reinstate that service, the Muirwoods shuttle service, this year. So This is we're going to focus our services on those core corridors that I mentioned and try to, again, work within the constraints of how many passengers that we can carry on those buses. Next slide. School transportation, as you know, is a new category under Measure A. We're requesting $1.2 million for this next year. And this category includes our supplemental school routes. That's our fixed route transit that serves schools at their bell times. It includes our youth bus pass program. And it also includes the yellow bus program, where we provide funding to 5 eligible yellow bus programs in the county, as well as the management that we provide to those programs. This category is our most challenging right now in terms of trying to determine what school service will look like and when it will start. So this amount of funding that we've requested here may not indeed be used, but of course we only we only actually get reimbursed for those expenditures that we have. And so we will continue to update you on anything we learn about school services. Next slide, please. Next category is rural transit. We're asking for a Measure A and Measure A allocation of $591,379. This is for our stagecoach service, the 2 routes that serve West Marin. This year, it's important to note that we are no longer using carry forward funds from Measure A, which we've been able to do in the past. And in fact, our rural service levels will be maintained, but we'll be doing that with a combination of our property tax receipts as well as our Measure A. So again, we were able to actually save up a reserve of Measure A in this category for several years, then spent it down for several, and we actually just recently spent that down. So that's our goal this year, is to continue to maintain that service. Next slide, please. The next category is seniors and people with disabilities. Those services are provided under the umbrella of Marin Access and includes paratransit, our volunteer driver program, Catch a Ride, which is the discounted taxi rides, travel navigators, and travel training. We're asking for allocations from both Measure A and Measure AA and Measure B. Here we're asking for $2 million in Measure A and $1 million in Measure B. These programs, some of the highlights for this year are that we are going to update the Transit Connect pilot program. As I mentioned before, that's it. We're doing that in collaboration with TAM and Uber. We're building a new program database to consolidate and streamline 6 databases into 1. And we are implementing the new low-income fare assistance program. So those are kind of our key objectives this year. Next slide, please. Turning to our capital program, we have a capital budget of $14.9 million for this fiscal year. We are requesting Measure A and Measure AA in an amount of $2 million. That funding is primarily to match federal funds that we have to replace paratransit vehicles and shuttles. We're going to purchase 16 paratransit vehicles, 9 shuttles. We also are going to continue with our real-time sign installation. We have about 15 locations where we're installing real-time signs. We have an annual bus stop maintenance amount that we use Measure A for. And then separately, we have funding that has been made available through Measure A for parking school buses. And we are still seeking the very elusive bus parking location for yellow school buses. What's not on this list and is not Measure A funded, but I thought I'd bring up just is that we are purchasing 4 more battery electric buses this year. So that's our capital program. And then turning to next slide. The summary of our allocation requests. We won't read all of this. It's part of what you are considering as item 8B tonight. And it's a request for Measure A and Measure AA in the amount of $14.9 million, close to $15 million. And that consists of funding from the old Measure A, as well as reserves from the old Measure A, and then the new Measure AA Category 4. Next slide. And this is a summary of the Measure B allocation request, which is the item you'll consider under 8C on your agenda tonight, and it's for $1,075,000. And you can see here how we use Measure B. It's staffing for a mobility management program, supporting and enhancing our paratransit program, which includes the travel navigators, our Paratransit Plus program, which has been Catch a Ride and now under the Connect program, and then other smaller programs to provide mobility to seniors, including our travel training, a little grants program called Innovation Incubator, and our volunteer driver program. So that's a summary of our allocation requests. And next slide, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great,
Thank you,
Nancy. How about questions for Nancy? Okay.
Judy, I have a question.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
First, Nancy, a nice report, and I know there's a troubled and challenging time, so thanks for all you do. I'm curious about the PASA program in the canal, and it does appear that the ridership is returning, albeit slowly, but nevertheless returning, and yet we still have the same restrictions, the space, etc. And I'm wondering if we're prepared to address the issue if those two conditions continue to exist. That is, increased ridership demand, which you've seen. However, restrictions still the same. And it seems like the pass-up issue, rather than 13%, is going to increase over time. And wondering what your plans are to address that possibility.
Yeah, it is a huge challenge within the transit industry, I'm sure you know. And we have been following very closely the 6-foot physical distancing requirements, which is how we got to the 9, as you saw. So through the Marin Recovers program, there was a transportation group that Farhad Mansourian led, and it included Golden Gate Transit, Marin Transit, SMART, and TAM. And we discussed this very issue and made a proposal back to Marin Recovers and to Dr. Willis to consider some other ways that we could keep people safe while they're both our driver, our employees, and our riders. And I think where the guidance is today is that it is still keeping the 6-foot physical distance, but as feasible. So there has been some ability to interpret that. I think what we would like to do, and we're planning to do, is go and seek further clarification on that to see if we can't increase that, particularly as Marin comes out of the watch category, or I forget what we're called now, the county's category by the state. As we come out of that, if there isn't a way that we could come up with an actual number of riders per bus that would be considered still safe. You probably know that in other countries and elsewhere, people who wear face coverings and who have other measures such as frequent vehicle cleanings and good airflow and that sort of thing, they are using a much less distant requirement, so 3 feet, for example, in other countries. So we are closely watching all of that and trying to get to something that would be acceptable within our county. Because you're right, otherwise, just basically buses are built for 37 people. We have them with more people than that in them most of the time. If we have our ridership return, we can't do it when there are only 9 people in a bus.
Well, I'm glad you're looking at that, and certainly it will be a concern, maybe an increasing concern. So I'm glad you're on top of it. It's no surprise, but I'm glad to hear that you're addressing it and giving it due consideration. Let's say. So good luck. Good luck with that issue. Thank you.
Thank you,
Commissioner Reed.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting report, and I can really see what you're up against. I'm wondering, just following on the Mayor Phillips's interest there. I mean, I'm also concerned about these pass-ups, and obviously, things are going to increase, and there's going to be a thing. And besides the regulatory end of it, I'm wondering if much thought has been given to putting ventilation and plexiglass barrier combinations in the buses themselves, so that you would have a fresh air supply, in the central area of the bus, and in effect, extraction by having ventilation going out between these things, these barriers at the window side. And at that point, you could increase the, obviously there's some engineering involved, but it may be a way to increase the numbers per bus and not having, to seek other means by, reducing the distance between people effectively. I wonder whether thought has been given to that. Obviously there's expenses connected with it, but it might be another possibility.
Yes,
Has there been thought given to that?
Yes, Chair Arnold, if I may just respond to that. A great deal of information is evolving, right, around all of this, and you raised several points of issues that are being considered. Certainly the air circulation is one of them. We ask that our buses, our bus drivers open the windows where there are operable windows, and we do have operable windows in many of our buses, so they are able to do that. We ask our passengers not to close them. So there is that. We also have sometimes a hatch on the top of the bus. Some bus styles have that hatch, which we can use. And then we are also further investigating just the air circulation through the HVAC system itself, and how much fresh air is being brought in and how it's being filtered. So that last one is something that we don't have a complete handle on. Again, different manufacturers of buses handle that differently. So we're trying to address that. There is some industry literature that even indicates that that it may be beneficial for the drivers to open the doors at every stop, even if there are no passengers getting on and off, just to help with that airflow. So those are some of the circulation things that we know about right now. In terms of plexiglass barriers, there are some agencies I know that are looking at installing plexiglass barriers between seats, and that would be, again, back to front, not side to side, but back to front. So if you can imagine at the back of the headrest or the back of the seat, it's kind of how do you retrofit those and put them on. I know there is a local agency that's looking into doing that. We're hoping that the manufacturers will come up with something, if that is something that in fact is useful. And then the other plexiglass barriers that are being installed are around the drivers. So the drivers have a compartment then that is of some form of plastic. And we do have, on some of our buses, we do have kind of an interim one of those, and we're looking into getting more of those. But that's basically to provide protection between the interaction between the driver and the passenger, as the passenger boards and pays their fare. So yeah, we are trying to look into all of these things. The information is coming kind of either very slow or very fast, and we're just trying to vet all of it. Great.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Lee.
Hey, Nancy. I had a question. So you said the seats from 36 to 9 is like a 75% reduction. But you didn't quote the other two and what the reduction of ridership is on that. Ultimately, my curiosity is, are the smaller buses more efficient, and if it can carry 4, but it was really only meant for 12? And then also, the cost of gas and other operations for those smaller vehicles and just running more of them more frequently, if you had looked at that, if you have an understanding of that. And then the other thing is this is a temporary situation, we all hope, right? And so you don't want to buy or do too much infrastructure that ultimately addresses a problem that hopefully will be going away. But there are resources that maybe you could think about adopting temporarily, like renting Bauer smaller vehicles, right? That maybe could allow the spacing better, and just doing, wraps on them or something for the interim, because they're not using them, right? Because their kind of industry is dried up. But I just wanted to ask if you'd thought about that, or if that's something that could be considered, because I think for me, I feel like running the really large buses right now feels inefficient, as where if they were smaller, but you could still fit in a good amount and you just run more. One, you're doing one of the things that you were talking about, which is staff retention, right? You're allowing a lot more of the drivers to run routes. You're just concentrating them into those more dense kind of corridors. That was just, I guess it's kind of a statement question about whether you think that might be working, would work, and whether you'd consider that, so.
Yeah, broadly, I'm sure you know that the reason we don't use small vehicles typically is because we want to carry more people with a single driver, which is because labor is our primary cost of operating our service. So one driver with many passengers is a more cost-efficient way for us to carry passengers. You're right, the fuel it's different, a smaller vehicle, less fuel, not the biggest cost driver for us, even now, or maybe especially now. But so while no, we haven't really considered getting additional vehicles. One is because in the past, of course, there were never any vehicles available. You're right, right now there may be. However, many of those vehicles don't meet our accessibility requirements. So they may not have lifts or ramps for disabled passengers to use. So we typically don't do that. And we don't have the drivers or the funding right now to acquire additional drivers. We've been able to keep most of our drivers employed with the CARES Act funding. So as we transition out of it, that may be something we could consider if we had funding for, as you say, maybe finding vehicles that are available that do meet our needs, and then also pay for those drivers. It's something we could consider. I think school service is going to be one of the things that really puts us over the top. So in terms of being able to meet the demands. So there may be, for example, school bus service that we will have to be considering.
Okay, thank you. Who else has a comment? Okay, and do we have anyone from the public, Denise?
No public comments.
Okay, so these, I believe, let me check with and these are just information except for, no, I think they all are. Is that correct?
So Chair, item A, the update from Marin Transit was an information item. 8B and 8C are action items in order to approve the requested allocations.
Oh, right. Okay.
So if you would like a staff
yes,
summary on those, we can
yeah.
provide that, or you can just move ahead with something.
I think let's have staff come and do something really short with it so they all know what they're voting on.
Okay, great. In that case, I will ask Dave Chan to give a quick summary of those items.
Yeah, certainly. Dave Chan, Programming Manager. Item 8B is an action item to allocate Measure A and AA funds to Marin Transit for fiscal year 2021. This is an allocation that takes place annually. Page 3 of your memo, or page 95 of your packet, is a summary table to show the amount that's available and the amount that's requested by Marin Transit. Just for your information, the amount that's available, this has been, we've gone through a number of exercises between the two staff to verify the amount that's available. So what you see on page 3 has been substantiated by Marin Transit staff. Marin Transit is asking for 13.8 million, a little under 13.8 million in Measure AA fund, 244,000 in Measure A fund, and 930,000 in Measure A reserve. The number corresponds to the number that was presented by Nancy, and this is an action item under item 8B.
All right, any questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the allocation to Marin Transit?
I move to approve the allocation.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay. We're ready to vote, Denise.
Commissioner Campbell,
Aye.
Commissioner Carmel,
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert,
Aye.
Connolly,
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks,
Yes.
Commissioner Helmer,
Aye.
Commissioner Cool,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan,
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Rice,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Sears,
Yes.
Chair Arnold.
Aye.
That item passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. All right, David, are you gonna talk about number C now?
Sure, very briefly for item 8C, this is an action item as well for Measure B funds to Marin Transit for fiscal year 2021. Marin Transit is asking for $1.075 million in Measure B funds to provide transit options for people with disability and older adult. A summary of the table is on page 3 of your memo or page 111 of your packet, and the number corresponds to the number that was presented by Nancy earlier, and this is an action item for your consideration.
Phillips moves.
Pardon me, who said?
Phillips, and I'll move the item.
Great, okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we're ready to go again.
Commissioner Campbell,
Aye.
Carmel,
Yes.
Was that me?
Commissioner
Aye.
Colbert,
Oh, aye.
thank you. Commissioner Connolly,
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer,
Aye.
Commissioner Cool,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan,
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Aye.
Commissioner Rice,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Sears,
Yes.
and Chair Arnold.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, let's go now to number 9, and this is to accept the Safe Routes to School Evaluation Report and Program. And our motion will be for us to accept it, and I'm going to go to the Executive Director to see who's going to be presenting this.
Thank you, Chair Arnold. So I'd like to ask the TAM Program Manager for the Safe Routes to Schools program, Dan Cherrier, to do a brief introduction, and then we have our Safe Routes contractor team here to present the bulk of the report. So Dan, if you would do a quick intro, please.
Sure. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we will be talking about several items. One is an update on the Safe Routes program, including what's been happening recently with the schools being closed. And the other main part of what we'll be talking about is a presentation on the evaluation report. The evaluation report covers the time period of 2016 through 2019. And it was ready to present several months back. However, at the request of TAM staff, we had attempted to save some funds to incorporate the crossing guard evaluation as part of it. And we were well underway with performing that task when the shelter in place happened back in March. And because of that, we've taken the crossing guard evaluation back out of it, and we're going to present the report without that portion. Crossing guards will have to come back sometime after the schools are back in session, and we can complete that evaluation. That'll be yet to come. There were trying to be some slides in it that are talking about things that have happened since the end of the evaluation period of June of 2019. So with that background, I'm going to introduce David Parisi of Parisi Transportation Consulting, and he has two of his subcontractors here as well. David.
Welcome, David.
Thank you, Dan and Chair and Executive Director. My name is David Parisi, and I'm always excited to present every 3 or 4 years to provide the results of the evaluation report of your Safe Routes to School program. This is a report where we look hard at the program, what's working well, what may not be working, what adjustments can be made, how are green trips trending, and so on and so forth. So it's a good look at your program. I'm happy to say that we have some good news. There's been a lot of successes over the last 3 school years from 2016 to 2019. And a lot of this is due to your team, yourselves. Many of you contribute and volunteer to the program, and over 100 volunteers that are part of the program. If you've seen the report, it's a big report. It has a lot of data in it. Talks about all the different E elements of the program. There's a large appendix that shows school by school performance, describes the different programs that are implemented, and keeps tabs on the infrastructure that has been built or is planned to be built in the near future. We'll talk about that during this presentation. I'm joined tonight by Gwen Froh, who's our Education Encouragement Director, and Wendy Callens, who's the Program Director. We're also going to quickly discuss some changes that we're making on the fly. It's like repairing an airplane in flight due to the COVID pandemic. We've been very, very busy this summer, and we have more plans to discuss. But with that, I'm going to start the presentation. Share my screen. I hope what you're seeing is the first slide of the presentation. Ann, good, thank you for nodding. Super. So as Dan mentioned, we're looking at 3 years of the program from the 2015-16 school year through 2018-19. We do look at several different elements of the program. What is working, as I mentioned before, what's not. We also perform very, very comprehensive surveys and interviews to really understand how the program is making a difference. Many of you may know that this program started almost 20 years ago when we had 5 schools in the program. We were one of 2 locations in the US that started the Safe Routes to School program 2 decades ago. A few years later, we were able to bump that up with grant funding to 29 schools and 11 school districts. And the last school year, 2018-19, we performed the surveys, we had 56 schools being represented and participating in the program in 14 school districts. You can see on the chart on the bottom left, the breakdown between public elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as private schools. This is a map that shows the location and the names of all the schools that are participating in the program. As you can see, it's countywide through all the cities and towns, as well as in rural parts of Marin. We refer to our trips differently and our success based on the number of green trips that we can encourage children to use, walking and biking to school. This chart shows active green trips are those when children walk or bike or scoot, when they use their own power to get to or from school. Green trips include active trips, but also include non-single student vehicle trips, such as carpooling, arriving to school via carpool with another kid, taking a yellow school bus, or public transit. Our goal really is to optimize, increase the number of active and green trips as much as possible, while reducing the number of vehicle trips, which we consider those trips where one kid's in a car being dropped off or picked up by a parent or guardian. This chart shows almost a dozen years of data that we've collected, and we only count information that's statistically significant. It goes through a robust process from the surveys that we do every spring and every fall at all the participating schools. And we do it over a course of 3 days. We average the data, we throw out bad data, and again, if something's not statistically significant, it's not even used. But what you'll see here is that over time, the number of schools participating in the program has gradually increased. We're at our capacity based on what we can do with the staff and staffing and the resources we have. And we've been able to increase, if not maintain, the amount of active green trips and green trips. Interestingly enough, in 2018-19, in the spring surveys, we had a ton of rain. So our numbers, we know, would have been a couple percentage points higher than even shown here. But keep in mind, we don't have the same kids every year. We're working with new children, new teachers, and so our goal is to maintain at this point the green percentages that we have. When you think about it, over 50% green trips is pretty extraordinary in our county for trips to and from schools. This chart, what it's showing you is the number of, since the last survey we did 4 years ago, how green trips have increased or maybe even decreased at certain schools throughout the county. We know that about 45% of the 56 schools that participate in the program, we've had an increase of, we're about 50% or more green trips at 45% of the schools. That's pretty amazing. Walking, biking, carpooling, etc. 10 schools have over 65% the green trip portion in our county. Many of those are middle schools or schools we've been into and keep on working with. That said, we also, you can see some locations that are higher than others, but overall, lots of non-single occupant student trips, vehicle trips. Typically, we're seeing that through the years, and we still see this, that school-related trips can be 15 to 30%, depending on where you are in the county of our traffic. We've seen generally school reduction of trips of car trips by 5 to 20%. That's just a general range. In some locations, we've seen over 30% reduction in vehicle trips in the proximity of schools. Just compared to the last 3-year evaluation, we've also been able to see a reduction of one-way family vehicle trips reduced by about 1,200 per day. We relate this to vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. We've estimated about over 10,000 vehicle miles traveled reduced per day, with an annual reduction of about 1.8 million VMT due to the program. This chart, we started really assessing what's been the change in family vehicle trips over this period compared to the previous period. And what we've determined is that the majority of schools with good infrastructure and continued safe routes program have seen a really good decrease in VMT as shown on this chart. And you can see anything in green, particularly in the big green dot, shows the largest amount of VMT reductions. In some locations, we'll actually see a reverse, maybe going back to a slightly increase in VMT. And those are locations primarily where we see schools where bus programs have been pulled, or there's been some consolidation of schools. See a little bit of that in the Novato area. But 60% of other participating schools have seen traffic reductions of up to 30%, as more and more kids have walked, biked, scooted, and been in carpools or taken the bus to and from school. A robust Safe Routes program has strong administrative support, an active and innovative team leader, and full participation in the different Safe Routes programs. Neighborhood schools and those with a high level walking and biking infrastructure also have higher number of green trips. And of course, those schools that offer bus service will find reduced traffic in the vicinity of the schools. And then finally, we certainly know that crossing guards provide increased safety and confidence for kids, particularly even older kids, to travel on their own to and from school. I am not going to go through all of these very detailed tables, but they are in the report. And what they're showing is a school-by-school listing of the 56 schools, showing their baseline conditions when they first entered the program as far as number of green trips or active green trips. And then what we've seen in the last few years by mode, again, only those that are statistically significant counted here. And then what we also have looked at every year for each school is of those 8 factors that we think are really important for understanding and promoting active transportation to school, which one of those plays a big role and which ones maybe not so much for each school. And these tables are in the appendix of the report, and really detailed data for year by year at each school is also presented in the appendix of the evaluation report. Every year and this is one of those data points too that we also show in the report. For instance, is Hall Middle School, where we've tracked the spring and fall surveys, the green trips and active green trips against enrollment, just to watch the trends. And we keep a very close eye on this, so we know which programs to implement and which schools to pay as much attention to as possible. And you'll find these in the appendix report on a school-by-school basis. The program also distributes annual report cards to each school. These are based on the survey data that I've talked about. And we provide some feedback on their participation levels as far as the amount of, the number of encouragement programs, educational classes that have been conducted, task force, activity, and more. And really provide a good input to, how are they doing compared to other schools, and provide just, again, some promotion and enthusiasm to continue doing a good job. Many schools, these report cards are framed and put in the principal's office or in the front office. We've continued to work closely with the various task forces throughout the county. We've typically been meeting with each task force about 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring to discuss safety issues, mapping, as shown here in this photograph, and the various school activities. We also work with the task forces to schedule walk audits and look at issues and consider short-term and longer-term solutions. The task forces bring together lots of different people, including public works officials, city officials, different school representatives, parents, kids attend these, and so on. This year, actually since March, due to the need for extra planning due to the COVID pandemic, we've added special sessions throughout the summer, and we've been very, very busy. And we've had an incredible attendance through the Zoom meetings at the for the summer task forces.
Wow.
The program itself is based on 6 E's, which are shown here, and we really have robust programs under each of these. And equity is something that we take very seriously, and we promote throughout all of the programs. The education programs, they encompass both safety and health and environmental benefits of active travel. There's lots of different programs that are offered. The core curriculum consists of 2nd grade pedestrian safety classes and 4th and 6th grade bike safety classes and rodeos. However, we've really adapted the program to work with all different grades. Again, you can see the different numbers of programs that are shown here. And Gwen, if you have any questions, Gwen would be more than happy to answer those. She runs the education programs for us.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll continue on. There's several education programs that have been implemented since the last evaluation report in 2016. The Share the Road classes is a program that's performed and provided to the high schools. It teaches different perspectives and safety requirements for each travel mode, including pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. A cool with traffic assembly. It's really fun. It's this assembly for elementary school kids. It promotes safe behavior for walking and biking to school. And then also, we were doing a lot more with sustainable transportation, including interactive presentations for kids and teens primarily, discussing transportation impacts on the climate change and what children can do about those. Another E is encouragement. And as you can see on the table at the right, there are lots of different programs that, or different ways. The Safe Routes to School program encourages children and their parents to allow the children to walk and bike to school. At the elementary school level, we really thank our parent volunteers who host many of these events and help us with the contests. Green Sneaker Challenge is one that we kicked off typically in September. We're going to delay that a little bit, obviously. It's usually a month of ongoing promotion of walking and biking to school. International Walk to School Day is probably one of the largest events we do. It's in early October. Many of you have been involved with that. And we're monitoring when that will be scheduled for this next time frame. Walk and Roll Wednesdays, super popular. It's a great way to start a program. You'll see banners in front of schools. We do see lots of children throughout the year, particularly at 35 schools right now that are using that program. On the middle high school levels, we have events and contests. We work closely with different clubs and students that are in leadership programs, and we have that facilitated by our own program staff. There are several new encouragement programs since 2016. As I mentioned before, this evaluation is to look at what works and what doesn't work and make adjustments and work with our peers. And these are some new programs that we've implemented based on that fact. For instance, National Bike to School Day is now promoted as a bike month instead of just a day. And we have an annual bike hero that we reward a present to or a prize. We also have the Green Sneaker Challenge, which was initially piloted in 2015. It's now an annual month-long contest every September, and we'll shift that to another time frame because it is very successful and very popular. We have a Search for Hidden Treasure program that is being conducted now in last year in 6 schools. It's a bilingual program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We also piloted in the last school year a Park and Walk campaign, which encourages families with small children who live too far to park and walk partway to school. So maybe several blocks away from school instead of half a mile or a mile away from school, but somewhere close to still help encourage and teach children good behavior for walking and biking and what to pay attention to, and also to reduce traffic congestion in the school area. And then finally, art contests are also very popular. They reinforce safety and benefits of green travel. We have several different programs that are underway with some of the art contests. Our signature program, as mentioned before, is the Walk and Roll to School Wednesday. It's 35 schools or so participated in this, and it's something that just has been sustained throughout the year. It's fantastic to see it. And the idea is to spill over into the other days, get them going on the Wednesdays, and it becomes a habit throughout the week. We have tables, and kids get little surprises and whatnot, and it's hosted by volunteers as the kids arrive at the schools. Green Sneaker Challenge is one of the bilingual programs I was mentioning before. It's in partnership with Health and Human Resources partners, and who are providing some staff and grant funding for active prizes, such as soccer balls, pogo sticks, and whatnot. And to keep things fresh and exciting for the students, a new Search for Hidden Treasure was developed in the last school year. And again, we can talk a little bit more about some of the surprises and some of the things we do to keep these activities fresh. The program also has worked very closely with all the jurisdictions' public works staffs, including the cities and towns in the county, to identify low-cost engineering solutions, such as those shown here, as well as medium and higher cost solutions, such as pedestrian crossings and new sidewalk, providing gap closures and pathways, so on. This map, which is also in the report, shows just the locations of where many of the infrastructure projects have been built since the implementation of your program. And here are some recently improved projects. They can include things such as just demarking a route for biking, to providing new striping to traffic calm a street and provide bike lanes and improve pedestrian crosswalks. We're also really keeping an eye on innovative treatments and state-of-the-art ideas, including special crosswalks, such as this one shown on the left, the active hybrid beacon, where a pedestrian pushes a button and the light will turn red instead of just yellow flashing lights. These are more expensive, but there are places where they make sense in higher speed roadways, and several of them are being designed for implementation actually this fall throughout the county. Your program has also every year or every few years, there's the Safe Pathways to School program that Safe Routes provides the conceptual plans and helps the jurisdictions prioritize those projects. Here's a snapshot of just one of dozens that were recently funded. And for instance, this project here provides narrower lanes to slow down traffic in front of 3 schools along Doherty Drive, provides buffered bike lanes and improved pedestrian crossings. And this will be under design and constructed within the next couple of years. The program also continues to develop, working closely with the task forces, suggested route to school maps, about 5 of these per year. And these have become very, very popular, really to suggest the routes that children should take for walking, biking, possibly even taking the bus, yellow bus or public transit, park and ride or park and walk locations. And in this case, even suggested routing for drop off and pickup. And these, again, as I mentioned, are very popular, and there's just been continued demand, and occasionally we need to update these when changes are made. Program also works very closely with the local police departments, particularly in regards to speed enforcement and crosswalk compliance. The programs that we also participate very closely with are TAM's Crossing Guard program and the Street Smarts campaign. The Crossing Guard program has a total, when school is running, 97 crossing guards, and 6 locations were additionally manned by non-TAM crossing guards at other locations. So very popular, and we always hear about just the demand for additional guards. Street Smarts is the education campaign for the roadways throughout the county. It consists of many different elements. You're maybe most familiar with the banners and signs. We're happy that it has now expanded to every city and town, as well as the county throughout Marin. This last year, there was a huge concerted effort in San Rafael, and they're a big partner now in the overall program. We are looking forward to refreshing this program. It's used much of the same media for a number of years, and we feel that some of the messages and some of the safety issues have changed a little bit, particularly since the preparation of the Marin's Travel Safety Plan, which identified many safety issues that we want to focus on throughout the county. So there'll be a concerted effort in the next school year to start making some shifts with the Street Smarts campaign, working very closely with the different cities and towns.
Okay.
The funding, the program has primarily been funded through Measure A and AA. We have occasionally been able and been successful to pull in additional outside funding from other sources. And of course, we're always looking and applying for grant funds for infrastructure improvements. Speaking of infrastructure, the program has built over almost $40 million worth of projects through the years. The pie chart on the right shows a breakdown of those sources of funds. The majority has actually been from the cities, towns, and county themselves through their own general funds, about 37%. TAM Safe Pathways to School program has provided about a third of the funding for grants or for infrastructure. Very huge demands for short-term projects as well as longer-term, more expensive projects. And then you can see the breakdown of other funding sources, including what used to be the Safe Routes to School funding, but now Active Transportation Program funding, which we continue to apply and have been very successful in pulling in money for projects through the ATP program. This chart shows the overall funding levels of the education program that we run for you over the last 11 years. And what you'll see in the blue bars, those are funds that is through TAM A or AA or B funding. And then occasionally we've been able to get outside funding to support and supplement the educational program. Several years ago, Marin Community Foundation, shown in red, offered some funding to help some of the education programs. And then MTC and through OBAG funding has also provided some funding through the years. But overall, what you're seeing is that over the last 5 years or so, the overall funding to run the program has stayed pretty static, while the cost of living has continued to increase. And while these expenses and cost of living has increased, we think just based on the quality of program, we've been able to serve the same number of schools since 2008. Again, we believe is due to the efficiencies of a seasoned and very dedicated staff, the majority of which have been retained for over 10 years and are super dedicated to this program. But there is a divergence of the cost of living with the overall program funding. It's our responsibility as part of this report to provide recommendations, and we have for each of the E's. There's a number of recommendations, but without going into every single one of those, I'll just give you a quick snapshot of some of the higher level ones. Obviously, we want to continue to promote education and encouragement programs. We want to continue to support the public works departments, identifying low cost, short-term improvements, as well as longer-term ones that we can apply and succeed in getting funding for. We want to continue to incorporate national best practices. We share these with other people and other agencies throughout the Bay Area and country, and we also look forward to receiving information from them on how we can continue making our program better. And one of those organizations is a National Safe Routes to School Partnership, which is a great clearinghouse for us. We have begun some really good dialogue with Marin communities of color regarding the appropriate role of law enforcement in the Safe Routes to School program, and really how to engage these communities. And we think we're doing a good job, and we're going to continue to focus on that. And we do hear the need to continue to retain the level crossing guards that we see in the program. Again, that is not a Safe Routes to School element, and Dan could probably chat a little bit more about that if there's any questions you have. Finally, we've been very busy this summer, busier than ever, with planning for when school will open up and how it will open up. We're not exactly sure. We've been taking working with our team to be a leader in promoting social distancing while encouraging walking and biking. This spring, right after the shelter in place occurred, the team created online classes, contests, flyers, and other messages to embed social distancing as part of the program. We recorded classes for 1st through 8th grades, along with Spanish subtitles, which are now on the Safe Routes website. We've implemented bike week challenges to engage students and their families to practice confident, safe cycling. And I don't know if anybody's tried to go buy a bike recently, but they're hard to find. It's become very, very popular. And we want to leverage that, by the way, when school starts again. And then finally, we've been working with all the various jurisdictions in the schools, particularly through our task force meetings, to discuss how we're going to socially distance when schools do reopen. What kind of quick build projects, for instance, make sense? Who will be partners and what tools will be available? TAM recently, I think that's the next item on the agenda, are some quick build projects where the county has received funding for 6 schools. We're working with them on that, but we're also continuing to work with all the different schools, as well as the Office of Education, and trying to develop means to provide a safe walking and biking environment to really encourage, to not lose any momentum that we have, but provide just wonderful environments for the kids to walk and bike to school when things do reopen. So with that, I will stop the presentation here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and Gwen and Wendy can assist me with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You've had quite a year. We're in a number of years, and we're glad to hear about it. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the report?
I have a question. I have some comments, Madam Chair.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to thank Dave and his entire team for the hard work they're doing. I really appreciate all the quantitative data that really allows us to track the success that the program has had over the years. I was at the Ross Valley Safe Routes Meeting Task Force yesterday, and there was very interesting discussing about opportunities surrounding social distancing, when and if schools open in the fall. And I hope whenever those policies are implemented, we have an opportunity to see, what worked, what didn't work, how better we at TAM might be able to support social distancing, and congestion reduction. Finally, before the shelter in place, I myself had participated with a lot of these activities, walk to school Wednesday and all that kind of stuff. And, those programs, along with the crossing guards, I think are 2 of the higher profile ways that TAM, really connects with members of the community. So again, thanks to those programs, and thanks to you, Dave, and your team for their efforts. And, good luck with the uncertainty around schools this fall.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Okay, who else? Okay. All right, anyone from the public?
We have no public comment.
Okay, so our motion tonight is to accept the report. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
I'll move.
And okay, so that was Alice Fredericks, yes, moved it, and Eric Lucan seconded it. Okay, let's call the roll.
It was somebody else seconded. That wasn't me.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
I think it was me.
Sorry. I'm gonna give you name tags. Okay, let's call the roll.
Commissioner Campbell.
Yes.
Commissioner Carmel.
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert.
Yes.
Commissioner Connolly.
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks.
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer.
Aye.
Commissioner Kuhl.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Yes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes.
Commissioner Rice.
Yes, and thank you, Dave and Wendy and Gwen. Great work all these years.
Commissioner Rodoni.
Aye.
Commissioner Sears.
Yes.
And Chair Arnold.
Aye.
That motion is unanimously approved.
All right, thank you. All right, stick with us, guys. The next one that we're going to award a quick build funding, and we're gonna award it really fast. So who's gonna present us?
Derek will be presenting this item.
Okay, thank you. Come on, Derek.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you all can see this. A little bit of background about this program. Back at the June 25th TAM Board of Commissioners meeting, we had a discussion about the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery efforts, and how do we think about our transportation system long term in the face of this pandemic. There is, TAM staff have been reviewing existing and some of our new programs where they can support these recovery efforts. At that meeting, there was general support for conducting a quick build program, as well as partnering with our local jurisdictions where we can think about safe streets and street redesigns. So we looked closely at one particular source of new funding. This was part of Measure AA under our local streets and roads, the innovation program. It's 0.5% of the overall sales tax, and the expenditure plan process, our expenditure plan explicitly calls out a call for projects to be completed to local jurisdictions with these funds. We are projecting $212,000 to be available through the end of this upcoming year, and are makeable through this effort. The goals of the quick build program, I'm going to start with the last one because that's really the definition here, is we are looking for easy to install and quick implementation items that rethink the use and design of our infrastructure, rethink what construction projects mean, that also support active transportation, as well as support our local businesses and our community in compliance with social distancing. Fortunately for us, we were aware of the NACTO guidance that was released in April of this year, called the Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery, and we used this guidance to develop this call for projects. It actually identifies different typologies of quick build programs and street redesign efforts to support social distancing and safe outdoor space during this pandemic. So based on that guidance, we developed a rather atypical application process. This is not the typical call for projects that TAM conducts. We determined a maximum award amount would be $20,000 after reviewing comparable programs, and we identified local jurisdictions as eligible applicants from the review of the expenditure plan. And we conducted a really accelerated process. We typically give a lot more time to our applicants, and fortunately, the Public Works Department's really stepped up in providing applications in a very quick time frame. TAM staff also worked really hard on getting this out the door. We went and had briefings with our Community Development and Planning, Public Works on June 17th and 18th, and turned around the call for projects that afternoon. We set a 2-week turnaround where our Public Works directors typically get 5 weeks, and we received applications by July 2nd. We had a selection committee that I'll talk about in a moment that met immediately afterwards, as well as our BPAC and our executive committees on the 8th and 13th of this month. Our Public Works departments submitted 11 applications. They were a mix of outdoor dining and retail type projects, as well as seasonal markets and street redesign efforts in downtown areas related to schools and school access, as well as general safety programs. Because of this, we developed a scoring criteria that was developed in a pass-fail standard. This is, again, atypical. We usually do a more points-oriented process, but for this, we conducted pass-fail. We wanted to make sure that all projects received some sort of level of public engagement, specifically with local business communities, as well as can be implemented this summer to meet the quick build nature of this program. We wanted all these projects to be viable for long-term implementation and could potentially lead to a future capital project for reuse of our public roadways, as well as repurposing existing infrastructure for bike or pedestrian activity. And we asked all of our project sponsors to identify the project type and the NACTO guidance and review the NACTO guidance. We received 11 applications. We were not expecting this many applications, and we're overwhelmed with the response that our local communities provided during this process. At the time of the BPAC, we had 10 projects, but Larkspur came in late. Again, with the short turnaround, we decided that it was probably best to include the Larkspur application for a quick build project on Magnolia Avenue to support the businesses in their downtown area. The projects run the gamut of the urbanized area of the county. There are a number of projects, including the county projects at various school sites that are shown in the map here. I am going to run through just a handful of the projects that we received. This is not all the projects, but what we were able to easily grab some nice imagery of. And we'll start in the south and work our way towards the north. Sausalito on Caledonia Street, they are proposing closing a portion of Caledonia Street and then modifying the circulation network and providing parking modifications to support the small town Main Street environment of Caledonia. Mill Valley, this is on the left-hand portion here is Miller Avenue, and they'll be temporarily closing this portion of Miller Avenue. They actually advanced an application that supported a toolbox type effort. So wherever businesses need or would like to apply for a permit for outdoor dining, they have the resources available to provide to their businesses for blocking off the street for that usage, and we'll be closing down Miller Avenue on temporary basis over the summer. Tiburon as well is looking at a Main Street outdoor market over the weekends. This street will actually be closed down to allow outdoor dining and markets to occur within the Main Street portion of Tiburon, or in Tiburon. San Anselmo probably has the most large-scale project. They're actually doing a conversion of San Anselmo Avenue from two-way to one-way, complete with parking modifications and additional room for pedestrians and restaurants to utilize a portion of the street. This will retain all the parking within the San Anselmo, within the project area, and staff are looking forward to implementing this project this summer. Corte Madera took another approach. They have the old Corte Madera Square, where they have a number of parking spaces available for the local business community, and they will be converting these parking spaces to allow outdoor dining and hangout areas outdoors. Novato took another approach that's worthy of note here. Sunset Parkway, just north of the San Jose Middle School, has had a number of speeding incidents and accidents over the course of the years. And they will be providing fog lines, which will visually narrow this stretch of roadway to reduce speeds, as well as providing speed radar detection signs and stencils to demarcate the speed limits within the roadway. So they're hoping to use these quick build techniques to slow down the roadway where they've had a number of safety incidents. Ross is closing down a portion of Redwood Driveway, which is the street here on the right, to provide a seasonal market, and will be providing areas for the local businesses to provide outdoor marketing and dining services. So our recommendation for the evening, this is an action item. We are recommending that the TAM board fully fund all the grant requests, including Larkspur's late application. That would bring the total budget that would need to be amended to $208,776 to be expended this current fiscal year. We are projecting that revenues will be available to do that, and we will enter into all necessary funding agreements with the respective grant recipients. Staff is working with the DPW directors to monitor these projects, and will report back on lessons learned, and will be likely to be moving forward with surveys during implementation of a number of these projects to solicit feedback on the use of these projects. So with that, I will turn this over to our chair for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Derek. A lot of projects, but they mean a lot to each location, so I think it's great. Any questions or comments? Yes, Director.
Is that me? I'm sorry.
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Just a very quick question. I noticed that there are 11 projects proposed, and some are fully funded and others are not. And I'm just curious on those that are not funded. For example, just arbitrarily, but for example, San Anselmo's $52,000 was requested for funding it to $20,000 up to cap. So what if they don't come up with the other 32,000 in this particular case?
In the case of all the project sponsors that have requested the funding, they've assured us that they can provide funding to cover the remainder of the project and have detailed that information in their project applications.
Thank you.
Okay. Who else? Oh yes, Director Colbert.
Yeah, so I just want to thank Tam for being so nimble and accelerating their process and upping the money for this. I think these are all really interesting and incredible projects. I'm especially pleased that Tam will be coming back with a survey afterwards, so best practices can be shared throughout the county. And finally, in response to Commissioner Phillips' question, I'm going to go back to my old junk bond days. I am highly confident that the community of San Anselmo, which is in the process of reimagining its whole downtown, will be able to find the matching funds to make this project a reality.
Okay.
For the record, I have no doubt.
Okay. Anyone else with questions or comments? Okay, do we have anyone from the public, Denise?
No public comment.
All right, do I have a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion to approve the budget.
Okay, thank you.
And Campbell, I'll second that motion.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell. Okay, thank you. All the roll.
Commissioner Campbell.
Aye.
Commissioner Carmel.
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert.
Yes.
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks.
Yes.
Commissioner Hilmer.
Aye.
Commissioner Cool.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Commissioner Lucan.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Yes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes.
Commissioner Rice.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodoni.
Yes.
Commissioner Sears.
Yes.
Chair Arnold.
Yes,
Thank you. That motion passes.
thank you. All right, let's go to number 11, which is the COVID-19 travel conditions in Marin County. And this is Derek and Ann, correct? Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Ann.
All right, thank you very much. So continuing on our long agenda, thanks for bearing with all these presentations tonight. This item is just for information, and Derek, I'm not sure if you want to say a few words to introduce it. We also have our consultant here. This is another way to kind of think about or look at the effects of COVID. You've heard quite a bit about that tonight from Marin Transit, from the Quick Build program, from Safe Routes, and so this is kind of another angle on that for information this evening. So Derek, you would like to take away with the item?
Yes, thank you, Ann. Thank you, Commission. While I introduce our consultants, he's pulling up our presentation, I will cover a couple, just one slide of background before I turn it over to Brian Canepa. He's a principal at WTrans and here today to talk about some of the data that we've been finding as we monitor traffic conditions during this pandemic. So again, at our June 25th board item, we had mentioned that we would be monitoring traffic and coming back with information regarding how folks are moving throughout the county and what's happening on our local transportation systems. The traffic monitoring and reporting that TAM does was developed as an increase in our city-county fee back in 2015. And we really wanted to establish our local conditions in this effort to compare to how the region and the state reports are looking. Are we coming back sooner, or is the recovery efforts taking a bit longer than some of the other areas? Is really an area of interest for us, and wanted to document that data for historical purposes. But we also wanted to use this data to inform traffic studies that are underway or will be starting shortly, as well as considering how this might support our planning efforts, support recovery, and then thinking through the policy considerations. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brian, who will be able to talk a little bit more about the data in specifics.
Great. Thank you, Derek. And thank you everyone for having me here this evening. Happy to always talk about transportation data. We have lots of charts and graphs here. I'll try to keep this relatively succinct here for everyone. But as you all know, the shelter in place that resulted from COVID-19 has really altered, obviously, transportation behavior. And this analysis looks at vehicle, bicycle, transit, different modes in different areas around Marin. The first of which starting is with bridge travel. The data here shows essentially the number of vehicles that are crossing Golden Gate Bridge southbound, Richmond Centerville Bridge westbound over different time periods. And as you can see from the data here, obviously the number of vehicles plummeted in April and then began rebounding in May. Another chart that's not shown here in the PowerPoint, but that is in the report, actually shows bicycle usage across Richmond Centerville Bridge, and shows how that has actually increased over time during the shelter in place. And similarly, some of the data provided by the county shows that on the county bike paths, like for example the Sausalito Mill Valley bike path, there's been a considerable jump in usage. And talking with my peers and others in the industry, it seems like this is pretty ubiquitous now, the increase in bicycle and pedestrian usage nationwide. I believe, it's just my guess, is that it will drop somewhat after the shelter in place is rescinded, but probably still be higher than pre-shelter conditions, as some people have permanently shifted their mode of travel. In terms of traffic flow, we really focused heavily on Highway 101, but also on 37. Each of these graphs, what they're showing essentially, I'll take this upper left as an example, is at a given point on the highway, counting the number of vehicles. So for example, this green line that pass northbound in a matter of 2 hours during the peak period. So on January 1st, for that month, you have this much, or sorry, this many cars passing during those 2 hours. You can see then over time, obviously, these decreasing all across the board. One thing to note too is all this data was pulled from PEMS, which is essentially a Caltrans resource. And although we tried to get different data points across 101 going south of San Rafael, maybe surprisingly or not surprisingly, most of their counters south of San Rafael are not functioning. And so we really only you want to pull data that was actually statistically significant here. Now, all of these traffic volumes that have been decreasing, I think are pretty apparent to most folks. And these have actually been matched by increases in highway speeds. And again, nothing unusual about this. We're seeing this in Marin County. We've been seeing this just about everywhere. I live in Sonoma County. I certainly see it here. And you can see, obviously, in places where there were potentially significant vehicle delays before, rapid jumps in the average speed. And in other areas, there are simply just kind of moderate increases. But across the board, you're seeing generally faster traffic, both on highways as well as even more local roads. In part to this, with a decrease in traffic, you do have obviously the number of incidents, where they define them, the vehicle collisions or nicks or whatever they happen to be on 101, declined into April and has since rebounded now. Even kind of so June is actually higher than January. Not sure exactly where this trend will go, if it will continue back to normal, or if we're going to still see a little higher rate of incidents because of higher vehicle speeds here. That remains to be seen. In terms of transit use and transit ridership, we've seen kind of a rebounding effect in terms of for vehicles and cars. Transit has been hit just hard across the board, and I know you already heard that earlier this evening. Golden Gate Transit looking at bus ridership here as well as ferry ridership. both took significant hits on Golden Gate, particularly ferry ridership. I mean, obviously bus ridership declined dramatically, but ferry ridership was even more so. Similarly with SMART, and you can see exactly where the shelter-in-place order came into effect and where ridership has been continuing over that time. And this plays out in daily averages too. We always want to confirm that it's not simply the number of days in the month that are causing these variations, but really on a day-by-day basis, you've seen a significant drop. And similarly on Marin transit as well. So again, very much in line with Golden Gate Transit and SMART, but not quite the drop in terms of percentages, not quite as steep as we've seen on Golden Gate and SMART Transit. One thing I will note, though, which is interesting here, is that these large drops in transit usage are due to people obviously not going to work and also not wanting to take transit to come into close proximity with others. To the best of my knowledge, having looked at the latest research, there doesn't seem to be conclusive research that actually demonstrates that using transit increases rate of COVID transmission. Actually, quite the opposite. What we've seen in different cities around the world is even as other cities have reopened with much higher transit usage, in even very, very dense places, transmission has not increased. So it's a challenge for transit, and some of it might be reality, but some of it might also be perception. As part of this too, we wanted to track vehicle emissions and looking at emissions coming from residents within Marin County. And as you can see, emissions dropped considerably in line with traffic, as one would expect. And of course, it's coming back gradually over time. You know, this sort of graphic is great because it illustrates, you know, that emissions can be reduced if you're trying to achieve particular climate goals. But it also, I think, illustrates how much of a shift one needs to make in order to affect profound change. Obviously, we don't want to continually shut down the economy in order to reduce emissions. But looking forward in the future, it's a sign of optimism that we do have the potential to be able to reduce emissions, but obviously we have our work cut out for us in getting there. So kind of wrapping this up and kind of what this all means is that, you know, in terms of highway volumes, yes, we've seen everything decline and they're coming back up again. But the congestion hasn't returned to the same degree. And that's because it's not necessarily a one-to-one ratio in terms of removing cars from the road and reducing congestion. If you reduce about 10 to 15% of cars from a standstill traffic jam, you actually increase flow by about 80%. It doesn't take that many cars. You don't need to remove half the cars off the road. You only need to remove a small portion before it goes from standstill to free flow, and I think that's what we're seeing here. Obviously, the efforts to maintain and grow transit riderships, you know, is at risk. You know, a lot of transit agencies across the country are really worried about what is going to happen for the future, and different transit agencies are being affected in different ways. So, you know, looking at, I guess, Golden Gate and Smart Transit, you might have slightly different transit users, maybe people who can stay home more easily for their jobs than Marin Transit. Not taking anything away from Marin Transit. Marin Transit has also been significantly impacted by this, but you'll see the data plays out in certain ways. As we mentioned too, auto speeds have increased and auto incidents are back, so you have lots of people still getting back into collisions again, and that will probably kind of return to normal levels over time. And again, the last encouraging bit about all this is that there has been a notable increase in both biking and walking. I was joking with Derek the other day that I saw someone posted a picture online of a bike shop with all the bike racks empty because all the bikes had sold out. And the posting said, bicycles are the new toilet paper because everyone's going out and buying them. And it took me a second to kind of figure out what the person was talking about, but I thought it was very apt. And I do believe that we will see some long-term permanent shift in modal choice because of this experience. And with that, I will wrap it up. Stop sharing my screen, it would even be better.
Okay, thank you. All right. A lot to think about, isn't it? Does anyone have any comments, any questions? Yes, Director Carmel.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that presentation. That was very interesting. I was particularly struck by your comment close to the end where you said that reducing traffic by 10%, you know, changes a situation from standstill to free flow. If you have a source or some research on it, I'd love to see that, because that's an ongoing debate here, and having some data surrounding that small changes make enormous differences would really be beneficial. So anything you've got on that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. It's I'll just, my own caveat is obviously the numbers will vary a bit depending on what segments you're talking about, but the last information I looked actually came from US DOT, Federal Highways Administration.
Yeah, if you've got some document that I could get a look at, and I understand that context is everything, but still very interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Anyone else? Oh, yes, Director Reed.
Yes, I think, yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And I think going on from Commissioner Carmel's point, we have a different kind of congestion management, perhaps. I mean, illustrated by one of the slides in towards the end of your presentation, when you're talking about the, you know, decrease in use at 15%. You know, basically we have highways that are designed for a certain amount of use, and then we're staying within that limit, and that's why traffic is able to move at it. We are also, you know, maybe in conjunction with that slide of the bicycle shop with all the empty racks, it could be useful to have one of the pictures in your thing had 3 or 4 bicycles all trying to cross one intersection at one time. And so I think it would be important for us to monitor what kind of congestion we're getting on our other bicycle and pedestrian also thoroughfares, seeing what we can do specific points to address that congestion management issue that may well be coming before us in the near future. So.
Thank you. Well, yes, Commissioner Rice.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting, and obviously it's not enough data over a long enough time to make any absolute conclusions, but one of the things that strikes me and I think we really need to hang on to is the difference in terms of how Marin Transit has experienced decline in ridership compared to the transit services that are more probably choice riders, folks who have options for commuting versus Marin Transit, which is serving a lot of folks who are transit dependent. And I think this is going to be really important for us to watch and our peers to watch across the Bay Area as we look at the transit dollars that are available to help supplement or offset some of the declines in revenues, remembering which transit services are serving those who are transit dependent. I think it's really, really important.
Good, thank you. Yes, Director Phillips.
Oh, thank you. And I think Commissioner Rice makes an excellent point. I'm going to ask this question. It's probably not fair, and there may not be an answer at this point in time, but you're certainly far more versed than I. I'm looking at SMART, and it's basically flatlined since March 18th. And the others are coming back some. But my question is there any way that we can anticipate change in ridership, presumably increase in ridership over the next, let's say, 6 months or a year? So much of wrestling with that, and but I'm certainly not that versed, so it's difficult for me to speculate, but perhaps you can.
Well, I was going to say, sorry, go ahead.
I think I'll start this one out. I think SMART, you know, we're always going to have trouble reading the tea leaves here. We don't know what the health orders are going to be when employers come back to mandating employees show up at their job sites. And I think that will be the indicators of when ridership will be coming back online. So I would say start the conversation with the local health officers and making sure that, you know, we're following the health guidance closely. I think those are going to be the first signs to know when we can expect our ridership or our transit system to come back online. And Brian, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
No, it's the $1 million question. You know, a lot of transportation professionals are asking themselves, and it's one of the things that I'm very curious about to see how it plays out too, is the fact that once we do return to normal, how many more employees out there will be teleworking, at least 1 or 2 days a week, and how does that impact transit ridership or traffic on the freeways? I know my company, for example, has kind of shifted its policy since the beginning here, and when we go post shelter in place, I think even travel behavior for my fellow colleagues will be different. And so I think that will impact transit ridership in the future in some way.
Yes, Director Phillips. Frederick.
Well, to the extent that self-reporting is a good indicator of what might happen post-COVID, there was a report of a passenger survey at the Transportation Committee of the Golden Gate Bridge this morning. Only 6% of their riders who took part in this survey said they had had any change in job status, and only 50% of those who responded, who rode 4 to 5 days a week, said they will resume pre-COVID levels of ridership. So that's either a great opportunity for grabbing them for alternate modes of transportation or a prediction of increased congestion.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Lee.
So one of the other bullet points I saw that I think made me think farther out was breaking the stigma of ultimately getting back into all these modes of transportation. And so, but you know, I see a lot of presentations with TAM about education, and I think that this is going to be a nationwide or at least regional issue. And so finding coalitions and thinking about advertisement and educational campaigns to help bring back all these transit services in a consolidated way might be a good dialogue to start thinking about when it becomes safe to really, you know, start incentivizing and making travel like that. You know, we do that a lot in aviation. You know, another example is when there was a drought and we were considering, you know, using black water and recycling it. People couldn't drink the water even if it was available and had been completely cleaned. But if we brewed it with beer, they would all drink it, right? So it's kind of like, how do you break that stigma of fear that's been valid and make it feel safe to come back in? Like, and I think we all have to think creatively about how to do that moving forward to help these institutions. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Sure.
Yes, Director Lucan.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a quick question for the ridership information that was presented, and I apologize if I missed it earlier. But is that information just coming from Clipper data, or is it coming from the transit agency itself? I know SMART, for example, has many different forms of fare types, and we do report that information on our website. So I was wondering if you could just clarify that real briefly.
Eric, I'll take this one, I guess. Yeah, so these are actually each from the transit agencies themselves.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? All right, good discussion, and I think very apropos, because we've been in this long enough that we know it's not good, but it's time that we start looking out and seeing how we're going to survive post-COVID. So good report. Thank you. This is not an action item. And so, does anyone from the public want to comment on this, Denise?
We have no public comment.
Okay. All right, so we're going to MTC's Plan Bay Area 2050, and I can't believe we're looking at that at 8:45 because it's huge, but let's do it. Dive in.
All right, it is huge, but this is just an information item, so we will try to walk through it thoroughly but quickly, and Derek is presenting this one as well.
Good. Thank you, Derek.
Quickly will be the word of this presentation. Sharing my screen, hopefully you all can see it. Once again, Derek McGill, Planning Manager at TAM. Background of Plan Bay Area, it is our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy for the region. The key for this process is to make sure that we are meeting our GHG reduction targets due to reduction in passenger vehicle travel. TAM is required to submit projects for Marin County. We did so in April. And we have received the results from MTC's review of that and their regional discretionary funding source, which we'll talk about tonight. And then the MTC Commission actually approved the final project list, the final transportation element of the plan yesterday, and there will be ongoing discussion about a couple items here. So a little bit of the overview. The vision for this plan is to make sure we're affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all by the year 2050. This plan consists of four major transportation, housing, economic, and environment. TAM's been working very closely with MTC on the transportation item, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. This was prior to the action that the Commission took on Wednesday, yesterday. But basically what is happening with the transportation element is there's expected to be $553 billion available between now and 2050 in this plan. Most of that is actually going towards the operations and maintenance of our roadway system as well as our transit systems. MTC has split up this $553 billion into two periods to comply with the 2035 CARB greenhouse gas reduction target of 19%. And so one of the actions that the MTC Commission took was to try and front load some of the money into period one yesterday at their committee meeting. The regional discretionary, which is really the key for this, since a lot of the money is tied up with ongoing operations and maintenance or existing commitments to funding, where the regional discretionary goes and to what projects gets split up amongst the counties and the projects in the region. And so that's really what we're here to report on tonight, which is where do we spend the $140 billion we have left over in the plan once you take away all the operations and maintenance items. TAM in April submitted a list of capacity increasing projects and programmatic categories, and it was somewhat in this format. So we are presenting this again with an update on the right-hand column. All of our transit projects are included in the plan. There's one exemption to that, which is the Golden Gate Transit service expansion on both their regional transit service as well as their ferry service. That's still under analysis by MTC. But the good news for all of our projects that are on this list is they are in the first phase of the plan, meaning that they are being planned for construction and operations before 2035. MTC, with their regional discretionary, actually funded our regional request level fully and put all of our projects in the near-term bin, which is great news. There was a proposal by advocates, I believe Transform, which is a nonprofit transportation advocacy group, for a regional express bus network. The TAM board authorized a $1 million for a feasibility study for the Marin County portion of that network. And MTC has decided to move forward with portions of that network in other counties and not include the Marin portion. So that project is not included, which isn't, it's not one of our core projects by one of our project sponsors. So not much to worry about there. Roadway capacity increasing projects are the other big category. All of our projects that are, a lot of our projects did well. Marin Snow and Arrows and the 101 580 direct connector received the full funding request that, our plan request that we requested in April, and both those projects were put into the first phase of the plan. The Richmond-Santa Fe Bridge westbound joint use lane, MTC was not able to accommodate within the plan. Unfortunately, when TAM took this action, we don't have enough, and we don't have the right color of money to support this project at the right time frame for when this project was expected to move forward. So we will continue to work with MTC on the traffic study, as well as the structural loading component, a study that's underway for understanding whether the feasibility of the westbound joint use lane. And we'll continue to work with DATA and our MTC commissioner on how we can advance this project. There's always the opportunity to amend the plan to include this project, and potentially even include this within the Richmond-Santa Fe Bridge Forward category of improvements, which is also in the plan. The bigger challenge is really the State Route 37, which is a much larger financial need. We are looking at a request of $1.2 billion just for the Marin County portion. Many billions are needed for the overall ultimate project. MTC has included this project tentatively in the final blueprint in the phase 2 of the plan, which we don't expect to be an issue given the long time frame for development of a project of that magnitude. But one of the questions that will be coming up is MTC is supporting highway expansion projects that can mitigate their GHG increases. And so what does that mean, and what does that mean for this project is one of the conversations that we will come back to in this presentation. But it may mean consideration of things like all-lane tolling on highways in Marin County. That would include the 101 and State Route 37. And that's actually what this slide talks about. So the interim project for State Route 37, the addition of the travel lane is tentatively included in bin 1. Whether or not the MTC recommendation is that all highway expansion projects identify potential GHG mitigations by September. So TAM staff and our executive director is working closely with MTC staff and data on this project, and will bring back items related to State Route 37 over the summer, potentially at a September board meeting. The ultimate project is recommended for bin 2. We're really just trying to track down what does this mean to fully mitigate the GHG expansion of a highway expansion project. Programmatic categories. This is sort of the catch-all to include all of our non-capacity increasing projects. They were actually all included in the plan. The minor highway improvements were included in the operations and maintenance budget. And then all of the bike and pedestrian facilities and travel demand management and all of these sort of categories that allow our projects to have a TIP ID to receive federal, state, and regional funds are all included, and are in both bins of the plan. One of the really good news items out of this is the sea level rise resiliency projects. Back in MTC conducted a call for projects for transformative projects as part of Horizons, and TAM staff submitted a project to protect all of the Marin County transportation assets from sea level rise. MTC staff and BCDC have been working to refine that general sort of proposal into recommended projects, and have identified 2 recommended projects. And there's actually an error on the screen. Both of these projects are included in the first phase of the plan, but they are recommending, they've identified $671 million for sea level rise protections at the Botham Marsh area, for the transportation assets, including Highway 101 and Manzanita Park and Ride, and then another $118 million for sea level rise protections at the 101 580 interchange, which is another vulnerable location within Marin County. Just to repeat myself, these are in bin 1, the first phase of the plan, not the second half of the plan. So a lot of upcoming activities. MTC will be finalizing their blueprint in September. The plan currently falls short of the GHG reduction targets set by CARB. MTC is asking that all the CTAs engage in dialogue on their projects that expand on the highway and emit GHG. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Their MTC is requesting all county transportation agencies to coordinate on highway expansion projects and are looking at expanding their proposal to conduct all-lane tolling on highways throughout the region. The first iteration of the strategy was centered on Caltrain and BART corridors, and they are considering rolling that out to additional corridors, including potentially the 101 in Marin County. Public outreach is underway currently. There was a workshop last Saturday here in Marin County. The housing element of this program is still moving forward. It's worth noting that Santa Fe submitted 2 new PDAs, so we have 4 new priority development areas in Marin County, and growth areas identified in the housing element of this plan, and also include transit priority areas, and then high resource areas with with a level of bus service that I believe is 30 minutes. And then moving forward from once the blueprint's finalized, the growth forecast for individual jurisdictions, as well as the RENA allocation process is ramping up, and that will really kick off heavily in the fall and winter of this year. So a lot of activity going on. This is just an update. There is no action item associated with this. CAM staff is working closely with MTC on State Route 37 to understand what the mitigations mean, as well as the Richmond-Santa Fe westbound joint use lane. So with that, I will turn it over for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Derek. That was a great job. Could you just go back to the beginning of where you listed the 4 or 5 different projects and what bin they were in? The last one you didn't comment on for Novato, and it was 13, but then there's nothing in the next square. So what is that?
That Novato Boulevard project is a long-standing project included in the RTP. That is for the expansion of the Measure A roadway project on Novato Boulevard. We've been coordinating with Novato DPW, and they will cover that shortfall with their development impact fees or other local funding sources. They've assured us that that is not an issue for this project to move track and receive funding.
Is it bin 1?
It is in bin 1, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, any questions or comments on this? Yes, Commissioner Rice, and then Hilmer.
Thank you, Derek. I think the thing that stands out to me is this report and the blueprint process and what we're doing with Plan Bay Area, combined with the report that we just had from Brian Canepa with regards to what's happened with the reduction in traffic and what that has meant for GHG reduction. What it adds up to is whether or not you fund expansion of transportation projects, we really have to electrify transportation is what it comes down to, because we're not going to meet the GHG goals even with the existing transportation infrastructure and with changes in commute patterns. But it just, we cannot meet the GHG goals unless we really electrify transportation. So just want to make that point.
I also want to just address the electrification as part of this plan if I can. So the GHG reduction target for the plan is actually from a reduction in passenger vehicle miles traveled. The electrification that is occurring actually gets accrued to the state level and doesn't pass down too heavily into the RTP-SES. There is some element of electrification that will be accounted for in this plan. But this is primarily looking at the reduction in passenger vehicle travel.
Okay. Dan.
Thank you. Apologies for my network issues. I've been going off and on all during the meeting. I just want to let the commissioners know that I will be talking to Ann Richmond tomorrow on a couple of issues, and that I'm trying to really work with my council and city staff to see the benefits of being proactive and looking at land use at Larkspur Landing around the various transportation synergies there. And it's been difficult over the last few years to even get the council to examine those in an update. So I just want you to know that I'm going to work hard to see that we move forward to support the goals of Plan Bay Area.
Thank you, Dan. We'll be holding good thoughts for you tomorrow. Anyone else? Okay, Derek, thank you so much. This was very interesting, and really thank you, staff, Ann and your staff, for putting on a really well-run meeting. That it was chock full of important things that we need to go back and remember now as we go forward. And do we have any other business tonight? No.
We do have a member of the public who would like to comment on this last item.
Great, thank you. Who can you bring her in, Denise?
Yes, it's Cindy Winter. And Cindy?
Hello. I'll be brief if I can, because I know it's getting late. About the new Larkspur parking garage, I am a dissenter, and I would like to present my reasons. At present, Marin, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's total planned GHG reductions fall short of the CARB goals. I don't understand why building the new Larkspur garage was approved. A new parking garage at Larkspur Landing threatens to increase congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. Such a garage would attract even more SOVs into the narrow corridor between the west portion of Sir Francis Drake and the east side. VMTs will increase. Level of service will worsen. As a result, greenhouse gas emissions would be expected to grow. Gradually, vehicles will become electrified, but nonetheless, that power must come from somewhere on the planet, if not from Marin. A recent study prepared for the fossil fuel industry concluded that not until 2050 would fossil fuels become markedly less essential for power production. In addition, though we all love our ferries, they have been a significant source of greenhouse gases. It takes a lot of diesel fuel to power those large boats through the heavy opposing force of water. The Bridge District is aware of the problem and trying to alleviate it. We should also require the same innovation and more from our road users. Unlike ferries that travel back and forth many times a day, parked motor vehicles occupy space merely as storage from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. With the smart stations, the ideal of restricted parking was an integral part of the planning. When COVID-19 struck, both GM Cruise and Waymo were on the verge of rolling out their robo-jitneys in a few selected cities. While I don't anticipate that AVs will be able to tangle with human drivers on the freeways for quite some time, robots can do well on set routes. Even before the virus has passed, we should be planning these routes from outlying areas of Marin to the ferry landing. With enough robo-jitneys, the existing parking space at the landing could be used in part for AV maintenance and storage, and the land proposed for a new parking garage could instead be used for affordable housing, which is a major MTC goal. A new parking garage is not mode shift, rather it reinforces the old status quo. And I'm sorry to be a dissenter, but I guess I have to be one. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else?
No other public comment.
All right, great. Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. We're not going to be meeting in August unless we have some emergency. So have a great summer as we taper off into fall, and we are adjourned. Thank you again, staff.
Thanks, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.